Tonight, we slip sideways into a near-miss universe where your phone never rings your calendar, never nags, and nobody argues in the comments because Homo Sapiens never showed up at all. You pad across a planet lit by cold stars and old fires, auroras, volcanoes, lightning, while wind combs tall grass and something heavy moves out in the dark with the confidence of a door pushed by breath. Tiny reality check. You probably won't survive this, at least not without learning new rules fast, because everything here runs on weather teeth and time. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while we're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments so this sleepy caravan can see where we've gathered from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into Earth minus us, and the first sensation is abundance. Life does not whisper, it hums. In our timeline, the oldest widely accepted fossils, labeled Homo Sapiens, come from Jebel Irhoud, Morocco, about 300,000 years ago. Here, that branch never fruits, so coasts and forests keep their original tenants. Frogs thrum like distant engines, cranes bugle the color of dawn, and hyenas giggle at jokes you don't get rude but fair. A herd parts a river with the authority of a fairy, and beaver dams terrace the current into glittering steps that sing over stones. Smell arrives before sight. Resin from pines. Iron on the air from snowfields upstream. The musky cursive of something cat-like written along the reeds. With no towns, the horizon is honest, a wide grin of land and sky. Clouds build into storm towers on a schedule nobody manages. Lightning parses the grasslands. Somewhere, fire rehearses its summer choreography, flash through dry stems, then green again. You crouch to touch a warm ash patch, already stippled with shoots. And think if you had a notebook, you'd write ecosystem reset button, underline twice, and keep walking. A mainstream anchor to steady you for about 2.6 million years, the planet has cycled through ice ages and warmer interglacials, paced by subtle variations in Earth's orbit and tilt. That metronome still ticks here. What's missing is us trying to play drummer. No smokestacks, no highways, no concrete heat islands, nudging thunderheads into weird moods. The sky is still smudged by volcanoes and dust, but it lacks the fingerprints we would have pressed everywhere like overeager toddlers in a museum. Architecture is everywhere, just not ours. Termite mounds rise like clay cathedrals, perfecting air conditioning without a wiring diagram. Beavers build palaces that turn whole valleys into sponges, where fishbirds and insects negotiate tenancy without bulldozers as mediators. Offshore reefs weave neighborhoods in a slow conversation with currents and moonlight. These are the cities that make sense here. Joke 1, you try to order coffee at a beaver lodge. The barista slaps the surface with a tail, and you take that as a firm no. A quirky tidbit floats up like a bubble from the mud wombats, even in a humanless world, still produce cube-shaped poop. Geometry persists. Nearby, a spider sets a web at face height. You wear it like a veil, pretending elegance while doing the silent, get it off me dance joke too. Out beyond the breakers, sharks older than trees slice the green water of a coast that has never tasted plastic. You give a formal bow to the ocean and vow to keep your hands inside the ride. Between those small comedies, you hear the thesis without us abundance balances itself by tooth hunger and season. Disease still moves, but along local trails, not on red-eye flights. A deer cough doesn't become Tuesday's trending topic joke 3. Predators prune, scavengers clean, fungi broker, peace between soil and root. Historians still argue whether late Pleistocene megafaunal collapses in our timeline were driven more by climate whiplash or by human overhunting. Here, that argument dissolves into weather luck and long memory. Another anchor the moon keeps hauling tides and continents still drift at polite fingernail speed. You balance on a headland and watch sleek bodies stitch the sea with arcs. No engine cough chases them. No sonar confuses the calves. What about culture you whisper to nobody? The air answers with examples from the world you know. Orcas teach hunting dialects. Crows remember faces. Elephants grieve evidence that intelligence wears many costumes. Here, those threads keep weaving with nobody grading the exam and no one insisting on a single syllabus. You crest a hill, and the evening plain opens. Herds stipple distance a lake lies pinned to the land by the heavy blue of the sky, and beyond, a black-green forest exhales mist like an animal asleep. Somewhere, an owl clocks in. Somewhere else, a small life becomes a meal quickly and without commentary. You take inventory of absences, wheels, bricks, lullabies, recipes, and of gifts, wind stars, the exact size of your next step. The planet edits itself in long sentences. Commas are centuries, periods are mountain ranges. For later laughter and a callback down the trail, pocket this scandalous human fact from the timeline. We know ancient Egyptians allegedly tried crocodile dung mixtures as early sunscreen. Not recommended, obviously. Still remember it. If we circle back to sunlight and skin, a questionable SPF punchline may be irresistible. You tug your collar up out of habit, which is strong enough to cross universes. Night slides down like velvet. The stars sharpen until you could pluck them like seeds from a fig. The quiet isn't silence, but a layered hush of wing beats, frog syllables, and far-off thunder. You sit on a warm rock and feel the planet turn, a slow ride, no safety bar, terrific views. You're small here, yes, but not unwelcome. You're simply unneeded. Tomorrow, if you were making those, might mean following a river until it becomes the sea reading flowers for water, or deciding your best survival strategy is an unapologetic nap in a circle of sun. You breathe with the land long, low, and patient, and let the map of this alternate world rest on your tongue like a secret. No cities, no scriptures, no stadiums shouting your name. Just weather teeth and time doing their old competent work. You close your eyes, listen for the next page to turn and wait for the planet to tell you where to place your feet. You walk to the edge of a continent that doesn't know where it ends. Breakers boom, but the shoreline is a traveler, not a border. Always packing, always leaving, always arriving. This planet runs on the long inhale and exhale of ice. When ice sheets advance, they drink the ocean and lock it away in blue-white fortresses. When they relax, the seas are poured back finger by finger into bays and estuaries. A mainstream anchor to hold in your pocket during the last glacial maximum global sea level sits roughly 120 meters lower than in your old world, exposing continental shelves as broad windy plains. You step forward and the map moves under you like a living thing. This is the Pleistocene baseline under your boots, a world paced by Milankovitch rhythms, the quiet geometry of orbital tilt, wobble, and stretch, writing a chilly music you don't need headphones for. In colder swings, the Laurentide and Fennoscandian ice sheets sprawl like sleeping white beasts over North America and Northern Europe. In warmer breaths, they shrink back into mountain hearts and polar sanctuaries. You pass moraines like punctuation marks here. The ice stopped to think then, stride onto outwash flats, stamped with braided rivers. First joke of the day, your step counter gives up in a snowdrift and declares you have achieved glacier. You accept the badge with dignity, squinting against a light so fierce it invents tomorrow. Sunglasses once carved with narrow ivory slits make sense here. You file that away the way you file away the wind. Everywhere patient, persuasive. Coastlines redraw themselves according to the ice's mood. You walk out across what, in your other life, would be drowned shelf, and find yourself on Doggerland, not as a rumor, but as grass underfoot, low hills stitched with rivers elk, browsing in mist cranes that lift like paragraphs when you approach. Far to the northeast, another bridge rises, Beringia, a tundra broad handshake between Siberia and Alaska that opens when the sea falls and closes when the sea returns. No guard booths, no passport stamps. The only paperwork is paw prints and hoof marks. Second joke, and the only visa, is the weather's permission. Megafauna stitch this baseline together. Without us, the big bodies remain ordinary members of the cast, not tragic rumors crammed into museum halls. Woolly mammoths parade over dry steppes, tusks sweeping snow like brooms. Woolly rhinos carve paths through thorny scrub with heads shaped like armored parentheses. Giant ground sloths move with the deliberation of monks crossing a cloister, and cave lions pad the edges of light with the quiet entitlement of cats everywhere. Breath plumes in slow metronomes. The air is seasoned with winter spices, crushed sage pine resin, the mineral whisper of snow about to fall. Nothing here asks your opinion. Everything here asks your respect. You trace climate not only in ice, but in color. In cold years, feathergrass and sage dominate, and Voli highways lace the subnivean world. A secret city under the snow, perfectly zoned and warmed by the mere fact of bodies. In warmer intervals, birch and pine push north. Blackflies throw block parties and lakes, ring like bells with frog song. Historians still argue whether the Younger Dryas cold snap is sparked by a cometary smack, a flood of meltwater, that short-circuits the Atlantic conveyor, or simply climate. Doing what climate does, mood swings with receipts. Either way, the rhythm you walk to is measured in centuries, not headlines. A single quirky tidbit waits where glacier meets forest ice worms. Yes, real wriggle on summer snow at dusk and dawn, so tiny you notice them first in your certainty about what can be alive. You lower your face until the cold pinches your nose and watch the slightest movement, a sentence written in commas that refuse to hold still. The sun breaks through and flashes hard on the crust. You consider sunscreen, remember our earlier crocodile dung fiasco, and sensibly choose a hat and the shade of a boulder. Good call. Because no Homo sapiens ever take the stage, the usual fingerprints never smear these scenes. No black carbon dusts the snow to make it melt sooner. No farms clear forests. No canals stitch rivers into forced marriages. No dams clip the fins off floodplains. Fire still works its old job lightning lit, patchy self-limiting leaving mosaics of age and ash that herbivores read fluently. The smell of smoke means grass soon to mammoth calves, not air quality index. Please stay indoors to anyone. You kneel to crumble a thumbful of charcoal, and it answers with warmth, not warning. Stand on a headland during a colder standstill and watch the sea crouch far away. Kelp forests pulse on slopes that in your other world would have been mooring lines and marina gossip. Tidal flats stretch into the distance like low-tide dreams ribbed with worm casts and dotted with seals that have never heard a boat motor. When the planet exhales into a warmer interval, the water returns politely, reclaiming coves, swallowing trails, turning old mammoth paths into salmon routes. Coasts advance and retreat, not like battles, but like breathing. You collect steady markers, talismans of how the planet keeps time. In deep glaciations, average atmospheric carbon dioxide ticks down near 180 parts per million. In interglacials, it rises to around 280. Ice cores stack annual snow like ring binders of ancient weather, each page pressed with dust pollen and tiny bubbles of archived air. Dust layers thicken when wind has more thirsty ground to borrow from, then soften when vegetation reclaims the surface. None of this cares whether anyone writes a paper about it. It simply happens. If this feels restful, that's because it is a world running its default settings with the volume set to reasonable. Your pockets fill with comparisons. A beaver meadow in interglacial warmth looks like a quilt sewn by patience sedges willows, mirror-smooth ponds where dragonflies thread light. The same valley under a colder sky is a museum of silence. The creek speaking through a felted mouth, the willows bowing like congregants at a snow-muffled service. Both are correct. Both are home to someone. You commit to being a respectful tourist who leaves only footprints so small the next snow erases them out of kindness. Migrations write calligraphy across the sky and steppe. Caribou come and go by instinctive calendars, not highways and fence lines. Birds market the air with V-shaped advertisements for endurance. On the mammoth-steppe, predators cull the unwell, and the fossil record bereft of butchery marks from clever hands reads, like what it is, a ledger kept by ice, hunger, and entropy. You try to draft behind a herd like a tiny cyclist. An annoyed matriarch gives you the look, and you discover you can, in fact, take a hint third joke lesson learned. By evening, the wind drops. The ice stops creaking and goes back to pretending it's a mountain. You hollow a nest in snow and listen to the deep hiss of the world sleeping. Above you, the aurora shakes out green scarves, and the stars look newly sharpened, as if someone licked a thumb and polished them one by one. Far off, a mammoth coughs a bass note in a song that is not about you. You promise to keep it that way. Tuck your hands into your sleeves and let the planet's baseline lullaby set your breathing to its age-old beat. Dawn lifts over a savanna that smells like warm dust and crushed sage, and you move the way everything moves here, unhurried but alert, like a sentence that keeps one eye on its punctuation. Grass shivers at waist height. Weaver birds stitch yellow thread through acacia thorns, a low drum of hooves rises from somewhere left of the sun, and a lion yawns with the operatic confidence of somebody who slept very well and plans to delegate breakfast. You give the pride respectable space. In a world without Homo sapiens, courtesy is not optional, it's survival with good manners. Elephants arrive as weather calm, inevitable, and capable of changing the map. Mothers steer calves between them like moonlanders. Tusks crease bark knees, bend shrubs into neat arcs, and suddenly a sapling woodlot becomes an airy meadow. Ecosystem engineers, the textbooks in your other timeline called them, and they weren't exaggerating. Where they dig dry pans, find water. Where they push thickets, breathe. Where they walk old paths, remember new feet. Close by, black rhinos browse like armored lawnmowers, lips tweezing leaves with the same concentration you reserve for untangling headphones. Your step counter, clearly a drama queen, awards a morning badge for politely not making eye contact with a lion. You accept and keep your gaze trained on the horizon, which is a festival of movement. Wildebeest thread the plains by the 100,000, then by the million, their calves keeping up on matchstick legs, because everyone here is born with a travel plan. In the timeline, you remember the Serengeti Mara migration swelled past 1 million wildebeest and a few 100,000 zebras, here with no fences, no rifles, and crucially, no imported cattle disease like rinderpest ever introduced. The pulse may run even louder. The grass grazed clean and then granted its weeks of green return. Historians still argue whether Africa's relatively gentle Pleistocene extinctions happened because Megafauna co-evolved with earlier hominins and learned caution, or because climate swings here were kinder. Remove us entirely, and the ledger brightens further. Lightning writes its summer cursive in the afternoons, and fire nobody's tool. Everybody's neighbor licks through dry stems, stopping at green and moving on. Without pastoral burning or plow lines, savanna and woodland make their own bargain, negotiated by rain soil, teeth, and sparks. Giraffes ghost the edges, heads in a different wind, tongues sampling leaves with violet grace. You pause under a flat-topped acacia and notice the ants furious in their exactness, defending their tree from overeager herbivores. Tiny security guards with a very strict door policy. Joke 1, you consider applying for a part-time job. The ants decline your resume with brisk bites. Rivers carry a different conversation. The Nile still flows north, a fact so robust it feels like a proverb stepping down through cataracts, gathering the blue and white like old friends meeting for tea and sliding toward a delta crowded with birds that don't know the word agricultural. In the Okavango, the rain that fell months ago in a different country spreads now into a slow-motion bloom, turning sand into glitter, reed beds into punctuation, where lechwe splash and painted wolves choreograph hunts with ballet-level blocking. Far to the west, The Congo Basin stands as the planet's green cathedral buttress roots, like flying buttresses for real figs, hung with hornbills, and a humidity that wraps your words and puts them gently back in your mouth. Apes write their own pages here. Chimpanzee communities crack nuts with stone hammers, fish termites with wands, and pass along regional tricks the way people in your world pass along recipes. Bonobos in their southern forests keep politics soft and alliances flexible. Gorillas garden by accident, planting forests with every seed they carry and drop. You try to photobomb a silverback. He delivers an unimpressed glance that says, "No paparazzi before breakfast," and continues his leafy meditation joke too. Without our hunting pressure snares and habitat squeezing ranges, can flex with climate and fruiting cycles and primate culture. Yes, call it that out loud, and in your sleepy head has time to deepen. Termite mounds stud the flats like terracotta libraries, each with ventilation more elegant than your apartments. On colder mornings, you see grass whitening with dew and mounds exhaling faint warmth. On hot afternoons, the same chimneys draw heat away and keep the nursery temperate. Sociable weavers take architecture even further, building thatched apartment complexes, so vast and long-lived they outlast storms and generations. No beaver cafes here, but the bird condos have excellent acoustics. You try to order a seed latte and receive only side-eye joke 3. Down by the water, a shoebill stands perfectly still with a face like an ancient judge, and then the bill slams with a wooden clop around a lungfish that looks deeply surprised. Hippos commute, pink-gray and immense, wearing their own biochemical sunscreen. Hipposudoric acid, the famous blood sweat that turns their skin glossy orange-red and keeps microbes and sunburn at bay. You are tempted for one foolish second to reinvent our earlier crocodile dung sunscreen scandal. Then remember you have dignity and a hat. The crocodiles themselves idle at the surface, like wicked punctuation eyes and nostrils aligned, smiling the kind of smile that ends sentences. You wave anyway. They remain welcoming. The Sahara still breathes in and out with the planet's tilt. In wetter pulses, green fingers push north, and lakes reappear where your otherworld maps print blank sand. In drier moods, dunes march, and the air becomes a brilliant, dangerous instrument. Sahel herds drift with the line where frogs dare to sing at night. Far south, the fynbos round the Cape remains a botany exam written in fire and fine soils, with proteas like fireworks paused mid-bloom and sunbirds hanging like commas in the light. A mainstream anchor hums beneath your feet. The Great Rift Valley still runs like a seam from the Afar Triangle through the shoulders of East Africa, where volcanoes write their slow memoirs and lakes stack like beads on a thread. In your remembered world, places like Olduvai Gorge and the Turkana Basin cradled fossils that taught us the long ancestry of apes who tried rocks as ideas. Here, the sediments keep receiving bones and pollen, but no hand axes, no footprints with baby toes chasing bigger ones across wet ash. The story records what arrives. What doesn't arrive leaves the gentlest kind of silence. On the micro scale, Africa's quirks delight even as they keep score. Dung beetles roll treasure balls with the focus of Olympic athletes, and when the moon is shy, navigate by the smear of the Milky Way itself, a cosmic GPS no subscription can cancel. Secretary birds stomp snakes with a flamenco that is 70% dance, 30% decisive argument. Cheetahs abandon stealth mid-sprint for physics, turning so quickly the grass can't keep their secrets. You remember the glacier badge from the other day and wish your step counter offered witnessed cheetah vector calculus. Alas, the UI is behind the times. Fireflies gloss the first shadows of evening. Guinea fowl gossip their way up a tree. A hyena laughs at exactly the joke you didn't say aloud. You think about how in your timeline, Bantu-speaking farmers spread crops and iron south and east over the last few millennia, threading cultures and languages across the map. Here, the languages are rain dust, alarm calls, and the drumming of hooves. Historians still argue, whether early people amplified African fire regimes or merely mirrored lightning's patterns. Tonight, lightning makes its own choices, and the savanna accepts the edits. You settle on a termite mound's warm flank as the horizon pulls on its indigo jacket. Somewhere a leopard braids the dark between bushes, arranging shadow like furniture. Somewhere else, a herd finds the new grass on last week's burn and chews with gratitude. The planet doesn't miss us. That isn't cruelty, just math. It keeps its appointments with dawn and migration, with flood and germination, and offers a seat to any quiet witness. You pull your knees in, breathe with the night, and promise to keep your footprints small enough that the first wind will carry them away. You follow the cold light east across a continent that keeps its vowels long. Wind pine snow until Iberia's oak savannas give way to broad-boned plains, where hooves explain the weather better than any forecast. Morning begins with bison moving like weather fronts. These aren't the fence-hugging remnants from the world you remember. They're vast herds, part shaggy, part thunder, pressing through cork oak shadows, then spilling onto steppe where the grass is short, sharp, and good at arguing with frost. In your timeline, European bison wizened, scraped through the 20th century with last wild survivors in Białowieża forest and careful captive breeding. Here, with no king's wars or rifles, they're simply normal again, brown rivers that flow around granite and through fog. The corridor north of the old Mediterranean peninsulas is a necklace of habitats, beach and pine, then open loess, then marshland, where cranes rehearse trumpets and frogs pretend to be rain. Wolves write gray cursive across it, all turning and vanishing, as if the forest swallows punctuation. Ravens float above like critics who've read every draft. Whenever wolves finish editing a deer, the ravens publish a cawing review. Joke 1, you try to submit a comment. A raven snatches your likes or straight out of the air and refuses to credit you. You walk through what scientists call, with almost sleepy understatement, the mammoth-steppe, a Pleistocene superbiome that once stretched from Iberia to Alaska. Without us, it keeps reappearing whenever climate favors cold, dry winds, stitching Eurasia to itself, with feathergrass, sage, and crunchy snow that speaks in small squeaks under your boots. Reindeer browse lichens, like monks tasting winter sacrament. Saiga antelope bounce over drifts with noses that double as air filters, their odd inflatable-looking snouts, making them the patron saints of so ugly it's cute. Lemmings tunnel in the subnivan warmth, a tiny subway with excellent service. Above the timberline, the horizon is a straight-faced joke told in blue and white. A mainstream anchor clicks neatly into place when you reach the Alps and look up to see a red triangle wheeling across high sky, a bearded vulture, the lammergeier, that bone-eating specialist of legend. In the world you remember, it survives in pockets and recolonizes with help. Here, cliffs are busy with their shadows. They carry bones high and drop them on stone anvil fields, then sip the marrow like old connoisseurs. You watch one smear itself orange in iron-rich mud. Yes, they dye their own feathers. A strange fashion statement, science still debates, as camouflage dominance, signal, or just vibes. Past the Carpathians, the forest deepens, spruce and fir conducting a long, resinous choir. Lynx move in the underbrush like commas that decide the pace of a sentence. Capercaillie thud up from snow with the urgency of exploded pillows. You try snowshoeing and discover the ptarmigan had the better idea months ago. Their feathered feet are built-in winter gear, while yours squeak treacherously. Joke 2, your step counter awards did not chase a wolverine, which is both correct and the easiest badge you will ever earn. Russia is not one place, but an atlas of weather. West of the Urals' flatness encourages ideas like distance and patience. East of them, larch forests loosen into rivers braided with sun on water, then into high plains where wind treats your coat as a suggestion. On a low, wide afternoon, you cut sign across a creek, rounded melon-sized prints, deep as your palm. The air smells like cold pennies and wet hay. Mammoths. Not ghost stories, not DNA teased from tusks kept in permafrost freezers, but families. They huff steam into the blue light scratch ice, with curved tusks to reach grass and flick snow from calves with trunks that never lose their sense of slapstick. Scientists still argue whether mainland mammoths could have survived Holocene warming without human pressure, or whether climate alone closed the book. This page suggests endurance when fire and spear never turned the margins red. Not every cat here is a memory. Far to the east in a forest that tastes like cedar and Cold River, the Amur tiger owns the snow. Its tracks soft, decisive cross your path with the assurance of royalty out for a night walk. In the world, you remember this tiger clings to the Amur Basin in numbers that fit into a stadium. Here, the stadium is the forest, and no one counts because no one has to. Elk keep their bureaucratic brows lifted, boar plow under fern and frost. You say a very soft wow that fogs in the air like punctuation, and then wisely step off the trail you were never really on. Lake Baikal appears like a fact you can sit on. Deepest freshwater lake on Earth, more water than the North American Great Lakes, combined a mainstream anchor as steady as ice. In February light, its surface is satin-tensed, groaning occasional cello notes as expansion cracks renegotiate their contracts. Nerpa seals blink with round, improbable eyes, the only completely freshwater seals anywhere, and surface in breathing holes ringed by claw scribbles that look like snow-etched calligraphy. You shuffle to the edge with your dignity in both hands and see fantastically blue ice under your boots, flowers of trapped air frozen into a galaxy. Quirks multiply once you start noticing them. Siberian musk deer wear tiny vampire fangs that will not help your sleep hygiene. Birch sap runs sweet all across spring. If you tap a tree with a broken twig and a little luck, it offers a clear sip that tastes like thaw. Foxes listen for mice under snow and then pounce according to a mysterious preference. Many seem to strike more successfully when they face northeast, a hint that they may be using the planet's magnetic field as a hunting site. You try at launch and immediately realize you are not a fox joke 3, so you dust off and stick to walking. Not all debates fade with the wind. Geneticists still argue whether the European bison descends mostly from the extinct steppe bison from aurochs or from an ancient hybridization between the two lines. Absent our bottlenecks, the Wazent here can answer by simply being themselves big and skeptical and good at leaving hoof notes in the mud. Paleontologists still argue whether the cave lion is a separate species, Panthera spelea, or a subspecies of modern lion. Under the chalk-lit roof of a limestone gorge, you glimpse a pale cat moving like poured cream and decide you do not need that footnote clarified at conversational distance. When evening falls, the sky throws long pink swords over the taiga, and the air becomes a very serious thing that lives inside your lungs only by permission. Reindeer file over a ridge, hooves clicking with a sound like distant castanets, tendon snap on bone, a built-in metronome that keeps the herd together in fog. Their eyes shine weirdly in your headlamp, not because of sorcery, but because reindeer, unlike most mammals, can shift their tapetum from gold in summer to deep blue in winter, tuning vision for polar night. You turn off your lamp anyway. The snow gives enough light if you let it. Food webs feel clean here, not tidy, never tidy, but right-sized. Wolverines cache meat in snowbanks that work as natural refrigerators. Owls own the silence so thoroughly that ice refuses to squeak while they pass. In valleys protected by wind, steppe horses drag incisors over buried grass with a rasp that's almost affectionate. You lean against a larch and remember that earlier, somewhere much warmer, hippos made their own sunscreen, and we had a laugh at crocodile dung SPF. Here, the solution is simpler. A scarf, a hood, patience. The planet supplies what's needed and withholds what's not. Night rejoins itself, and the aurora stages a repeat performance in greens and faint purples robes shaken over a choir of black trees. You bed in a drift back warmed by the mound of what is either a very friendly snowbank or an indifferent rock, and listen for the far thump of bison crossing a frozen creek. The corridor from Iberia to Siberia stays open in your head, a living highway of hoof clawing and frost loud where it needs to be and quiet where it matters. You close your eyes and let that long northern sentence carry you a few words farther toward sleep. You cross the windy grass of Beringia with caribou for neighbors and step onto a continent that greets you with hoofbeats and breath clouds, not headlights. Alaska is a room with many doors, and every door opens on motion. In the flats below the Brooks Range steppe, bison plow the snow with noses like shovels. Out on river ice, a pack of dire wolves, bigger, stockier than the gray wolves. You remember drifts like low smoke ears forward tails. Level the old guild at work. In our timeline, geneticists found dire wolves were not true wolves at all, but a deeper branch, a cousin that went its own way long ago. Here, that way, keeps going padded and confident, unbothered by the rumors of extinction that never arrive. West Coast light relaxes the moment you hit the Pacific Northwest. Rain braids through hemlock and cedar. Salmon write silver commas upstream. Black bears method act as river rocks until whoosh fish. A redwood colonnade rises beyond trees so old they make your step feel like a whispered aside. You remember our earlier beaver cafe joke and smile at new architecture. A giant beaver the size of a sofa cleaves a pond, its head a dark, deliberate wedge. Casteroids swims past. No one's sure if its extinct cousin built dams. Historians still argue whether giant beavers engineered landscapes like their modern relatives or simply preferred big calm water. But either way, the wetland holds ducks like punctuation and dragonflies that sketch figure eights on the air. Turn east, and the land opens until the sky can see its reflection in the grass. The Great Plains are exactly what they say on the tin Great and Plains. Horses, native ones, not the reintroduced cavalry mounts from your memory grays in rippling bands beside camel herds that look like a typo left on the wrong continent. Mainstream anchor to tuck behind your ear horses and camels evolved here in North America and only later spread elsewhere. In your world, they vanished at the end of the Pleistocene and horses returned with the Spanish. In this world, they never left. Pronghorns stand sentinel eyes like polished amber calves, folded into grass, and then flick everything moves. You jog a few steps to keep up. Pronghorn glance over their shoulders, read your cardio like a resume, and accelerate to a speed limit, clearly posted only in their heads. Joke one, you consider drafting behind one like a tiny Tour de Paris entrant. The pronghorn files a restraining order with its legs. Predators keep the syllabus clear. An American lion, pale and huge, passes between bunchgrasses with a step that edits the scene. Over a ridge, a cheetah shape breaks into the open Miracinonyx, the American cheetah-like cat that probably trained pronghorn to be as fast as unfinished thought. In the coulees, a short-faced bear tips its head and inhales information at a distance you can feel. Scientists still argue whether Arctodus was a pursuit hunter or a dominant thief who shouldered others off their kills with the confidence of a heavyweight at a picnic. You take the hint, step politely off the menu, and admire the scenery with renewed professionalism. Southwest light hits different, harder, clearer, as if the sun sanded the air. Sonoran flats ripple with ocotillo wands and prickly pears. Between washes, trundle the strangest tanks on Earth glyptodonts, Volkswagen-sized armadillo kin with domed shells and club tails that say in perfect body language, "We do not hurry." Nearby, a 9-banded armadillo proves physics is a suggestion by inflating its gut to float a flooded arroyo. A quirky tidbit you'll treasure whenever you need a mental picture of a tin boat in a cowboy hat. Turkey vultures slalom on thermals and cool themselves. The old-fashioned way, eurohydrosis, a tidy scientific term for leg air conditioning. You really don't want to copy. Joke 2. You ask a passing condor for the Wi-Fi password. It answers by being a condor, which is to say, majestically unhelpful. Slide into the high Rockies, where thin air makes a crisp, expensive sound in your lungs. elk ring timberline meadows. Snowshoe hares carry their own winter disguises. A puma's neat signatures stitch the wind-scoured saddles. In kettle bogs and spruce swales eastward mastodons wade, where sphagnum drinks the light browsing with shovel jaws that make trees negotiate. The bones here read like weather diaries. No cut marks, no butchered joints, because no clever hands ever arrived to turn proboscideans into portable dinners. Rivers run unregulated beavers, terrace them into pearl strings and floodplains, breathe the way lungs do, expand, relax, clean the blood of a valley, down where warmth loosens the map into vines. Central America pours itself into a narrow isthmus that changed the world without consulting anyone. Mainstream anchor a few million years ago, the Isthmus of Panama knit North and South America together, launching the great American biotic interchange. Armadillos, ground sloths, and terror birds moving north, horses, bears, and cats moving south. Without us, that migration continues to tee ecosystems like musicians, swapping themes. Agoutis ping-pong seeds for hardwoods. Jaguars paint rosettes into the underbrush and carry their shadow with them. Harpy eagles hang in air so saturated you can hear the green. Then the continent exhales into South America, and the pampas run to the edge of sight. Out on the grass, a glyptodont parks itself like a misplaced boulder, while a giant ground sloth, Megatherium, with shoulders like a sofa and claws like question marks, leans into a tree for leaves it really wants. On the same stage, Toxodon hippo-ish, but not a hippo, and Macrauchenia, a camel-ish thing with a soft prehensile nose, pass like inventions sketched by a cheerful paleontologist. Smilodon. The famous saber-tooth is here too, not a jungle lurker, but a heavyweight grappler of open-ground forelimbs, thick as statements canines, bright as parentheses. You do not want to test. You step around a dust wallow that smells like dry wool and history. Amazonia inhales you. The air is a fabric you can wear. Leafcutter ants march the night shift, with green flags farming fungus in underground cities engineered with more care than most human apartment blocks. No terra preta soils smolder with the ghost of ancient gardens. That was a human art in your timeline, and here the river does its own composing building islands, erasing them shuffling nutrients with flood pulse and faith. A capybara blinks, chews, blinks again, and a caiman does mathematics very quietly just offshore. Electric eels actually knife fish sleep under logs, like loaded metaphors. Joke 3, you try to charge your imaginary phone on 1 and realize that's a plot twist best left untested. Climb. The Andes lift you into slow light, where llamas and their wild cousins, guanaco and vicuña, pin their silhouettes to ridgelines and let the wind comb them into legends. With no herders, no fleece markets, no little bells, they move like weather with feet. A condor wheels close wings, tilting to taste the rising air off sun-warmed rock, and the shadow that crosses you feels like a benediction. Glaciers cling where they can, sketching their signatures into the bedrock in long, slow handwriting that will still be legible when oceans rearrange their furniture again. Not every absence is simple. In your world, archaeologists still argue whether people first reached the Americas by a coastal kelp highway, an inland ice-free corridor, or both. Here, there are no campsites on beaches now, drowned by rising seas, no Clovis, fluted points gleaming in arroyo cuts, no sandal prints drying by an obsidian flake. The debates become what they truly were all along. Questions about wind, ice, and chance. The white sands footfalls you may have heard about, those ghostly trackways across gypsum, never press themselves into the silt. The silence isn't empty. It's full of everything else. Dusk on the pampas is a low fire under a big pan. Rhea's step with long-legged seriousness. Maned wolves, tall red fox on stilts, move through grass that can hide whole weather systems. Opossums bustle with a confidence understandable in a creature that shrugs off snake venom better than most and carries 50 teeth like secrets. Armadillos snuffle like tiny armored vacuum cleaners. Somewhere in a gallery forest, a jaguar coughs a sound like a door closing. Calmly, and the dark rearranges itself around the idea of your smallness. You sit, knees up, elbows on knees, and let both continents move through you. Pride doesn't live here. Awe does. The Americas roar and purr and trundle and fly. They do not miss us. They are busy. You pull your hat lower. Remember the crocodile dung sunscreen fiasco we swore we'd never revisit, and watch the Milky Way spill like a river you can finally hear. The herds breathe. The forests knit. The deserts write their sharp little poems. You sleep briefly like a polite guest in a world that was always able to host itself. Morning breaks sideways, a pale coin rolling along an orange horizon, and the land under your boots feels sideways too. The birds sound different. The trees peel in ribbons, and every mammal seems built by a committee that never met. You have stepped onto Sahel, the supercontinent that appears whenever seas drop Australia welded to New Guinea, and Tasmania in cold times, separated again when the water returns. A mainstream anchor you can hang your hat on for tens of millions of years. Australia drifted apart from other continents, marooning lineages and letting marsupials and monotremes keep the keys. Without our rafts camps and careful fires, this place writes its own epic with a very local accent. Spinifex plains buzz like a soft radio. Red kangaroos graze with clockwork gracetails propped like third legs. Then the ground starts coming toward you. No, that's a diprotodon. A wombat relative the size of a small car. All gentle insistence and low gears. Wombat tanks, you think. And watch how their browsing opens scrubs into airy galleries, changing where fire can travel, and how grass stages its green encores. Fire here is nobody's tool. Lightning lights it, wind conducts it, patchwork regrowth follows. In your remembered world, Aboriginal fire stick farming painted fine mosaics across the bush for tens of millennia. Here the pattern is coarser, slower set by storm seasons and chance. Historians still argue whether people made fires smaller and kinder or merely matched lightning's rhythm. Tonight, the eucalyptus oils speak for themselves with blue smoke and quick tongues. Then, the ground blackens into a promise. A shadow slips between bloodwood trunks and stops your heart politely. Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion, big-shouldered and silent with shearing molars sharp as a thesis. It moves like a cat dreamed by a sculptor fond of rectangles. Paleontologists still argue whether it ambushed from trees or wrestled on the ground, and whether it specialized on giant kangaroos or anything it could surprise. You decide not to contribute data. Nearby, a monitor lizard call it Varanus priscus. If you like your monsters with Latin slides, its long head out from a mulga's shade. Some reckon this giant could reach bust length. Others insist on something more personal-sized. Either way, you yield the path. Joke won your step counter awards, did not pet the enormous lizard. You feel seen. North, the monsoon builds cathedrals of cloud over floodplains, laced with paperbark swamps. Magpie geese honk like outboard motors from a time that never happens. Jabirus pick their steps. Saltwater crocodiles park themselves like very convincing logs. You remember our earlier sunscreen fiasco and keep your distance hat on dignity tucked. In kakadu-like wetlands, untouched by buffalo. Cane toads or feral pigs invaders that never arrive without ships. Lotus and wild rice spread freely. Brogas dance in pairs, head plumes bobbing to music only they can hear. You clap once. They pretend not to notice. Under a tangle of banksia, a short-faced giant kangaroo Coptodon, big-headed brows bent, leans back on its tail and reaches for leaves with hands like careful questions. Historians still argue whether it hopped like its cousins or power-walked with a gait that would make your hip flexors write a letter of resignation. It does neither for you. It chews, blinks, and lets eucalyptus aftertaste turn the air into cough drops. Then the thunder that isn't weather arrives. Genyornis, a great flightless bird with a beak like a guillotine and opinions to match strides out of scrub, shepherding a gaggle of striped chicks that look like drumsticks with legs. In your other world, there were hints of people cooking its eggs long ago, charred shells whispering around campfires. Here, no campfires, no stolen breakfasts, just a bird whose footsteps are punctuation. Joke 2, you rate its customer service 5 stars without making eye contact. Down in the cooler gullies, where tree ferns switch on the past, something dog-shaped and shy watches from dapple thylacine the Tasmanian tiger, but not confined to an island. It pads mainland shadows as it did before dingoes ever existed, and here dingoes never do. It yawns a yawn striped at the hips, and the forest breathes a little slower. Tasmanian devils, too, bustle in black faces, red splashed with heat voices, like late-night arguments between kettles. Without imported foxes or cats, quolls keep their spots and their swagger. Bandicoots rustle like polite errors in the leaf litter. The food web feels like a net in good repair. No torn squares, no sagging knots. Quirky tidbit time courtesy of a stream. The color of bottle glass. A platypus ghosts past your ankles. A tidy brown submarine with a leather bill and vanishes under a root, with a flick that means business. Later that night, under starlight, you shine a cautious UV torch at a dead branch and discover something else they don't put on postcards. Platypuses biofluoresce, glowing a soft green-blue like river secrets. Also because the planet enjoys footnotes, males carry venomous spurs on their hind legs in breeding season. Do not annoy a monotreme. In the red sand farther west, a thorny devil pauses like a tiny tank covered in cathedral spires. Capillary grooves wick dew from toe to mouth, so it can drink by standing still and being clever. Joke 3, you ask it for hydration tips. It strikes a pose that says, be the straw you want to see in the world. Far offshore, the Great Barrier Reef exhales with tides 2,000-odd kilometers of living architecture humming in polyphonic choral. With no coastal sugar runoff, no dredging, no plastic confetti, and no industrial climate. Spike the reef cycles, stress and recovery on its own schedule, bleaching in strong El Niño years, then recoloring as cool currents stitch life back in. Parrotfish nap in mucus sleeping bags. Giant clams eye the light like stained glass. Sea snakes tie themselves into elegant knots and then unravel them just because they can. You float face down, listening to shrimp crackle like frying bacon, and realize the ocean is never quiet. It's simply good at keeping its conversations local. Back on land, the Great Dividing Range catches weather by the sleeve and wrings it out rainforests to the east, drier rain shadow to the west. Lyrebirds practice mimicry without chainsaws to study. Instead, they remix whipbirds' waterfalls and the thump of wallaby feet into DJ sets that make you grin into your collar. Koalas, meanwhile, maintain their dignified commitment to sleeping through most major events, a lifestyle philosophy you are deeply tempted to adopt. Their eucalyptus diet remains a narrow sermon with a lot of chewing. Without roads and dogs, they cross between groves like sleepy diplomats. Southward, a land bridge appears in cold times and vanishes in warm letting. Tasmanian forests trade genes with mainland kin and then take long breaks. Snowgums hold lines of frost as if writing in pale ink. Wedge-tailed eagles skate the wind with wings that end in 10 deliberate fingers. In alpine hollows, corroboree frogs wear hazard yellow with the entitlement of royalty. You kneel and feel how clean the air is sharp enough to teach your lungs manners. Not all mysteries end when we leave the stage. Paleoclimatologists still argue whether Australia's Pleistocene became too dry, too fast for some giants, or whether people sealed fates by hunting and burning. Here, the ledger reflects only droughts, floods, and time. The giants rise and fall with lakes and grasses coming close to the edge, then stepping back when rains return. The storyline never needs a spear to explain itself. evening pours in from every direction at once. The bush clicks, churs, churs. Flying foxes lift like night flowers. Sugar gliders unroll from bark, and sow dark to dark with a single throw. A cassowary shoulders through fan palms in the far north thick legs, measured cask moonlit. You give it the nightclub bouncer respect it deserves and pass like wind. Your step counter pings, excellent decision-making. For once, you agree. And under it all, an old drumbeat you can feel in your ankles, isolation rain, lightning jaws, seeds. Australia keeps its secrets. But when you walk softly, it shares enough footprints in ash that belongs to storms. A feather caught in spinifex, a platypus glow that fades when you laugh. You curl against a warm boulder, smell eucalyptus, and let the southern sky, upside down on purpose, tilt you towards sleep. You stand on a basalt headland, and the planet breathes in a language you don't have to study long, patient syllables of, swell a hiss of foam that writes and erases the same sentence all day. The first gift is absence, no plastic confetti braided into rack lines, no diesel tang, no sonar throb pinning the water to a headache. The sea carries its own old noises. Wind, whale, rain, the distant thunder of a shelf break rearranging itself, and it carries them cleanly. You lean forward, and the spray salts your face. It is the only sunscreen you'll need tonight, and learned from earlier, considerably classier than crocodile dung. Currents cuff the capes and curl into gyres the great slow clockwork that keeps heat and salt in conversation. Mainstream anchor to hold on to. While your footing is dramatic, the global overturning circulation ferries warm surface water poleward and returns cold, dense water along the abyss. A planetary conveyor that helps keep Europe milder than its latitude and stirs nutrients up where winds allow. When trade winds relax in the tropical Pacific, El Niño tilts the table. When they tighten, La Niña sets the pieces back. Monsoons answer to these far whispers, and storms volunteer as editors underlining shorelines with foam. You move south along a kelp coast that combs the tide into green hair. Sea otters roll on the surge like content punctuation cracking urchins. On favorite stones they stash quirky tidbit in stretchy pockets under their forearms. Where otters keep working, kelp forests stand fronds vaulting 30 feet overhead. Fish schooling in amber light, abalone clamping down like disciplined doorstops. Without fur traps, rifles, or oil ships, the balance holds. No urchin barons gnaw the seafloor into stubble. In the colder shallows, a shadow the size of a sedan grazes kelp with serene insistence. If a stellar sea cow belongs here, this is where it would be. And historians still argue whether its pre-contact range ever stretched far beyond the far North Pacific or had already retreated to pockets before our species ever met it on paper. Far offshore, the blue goes deep, and then deeper the color sharpening until it stops being a color and becomes temperature. A column of bubbles climbs, and then a shape like a hill wearing a jaw surfaces. Blue whale, largest animal ever known, bigger than the biggest sauropod you learned about while doodling in the margins. The exhale is a warm linen press blast, and the breath smells faintly of the sea's pantry. Nobody hunts this singer. Nobody teaches it to flinch from ship hulls or confuse its calves with mid-frequency pings. Bowheads in polar basins grow into centuries, layering their earwax like tree rings, living long enough to treat glaciers as recurring characters. Greenland sharks loiter below old as ballads pupils, ghosted with tiny parasitic lanterns. Joke 1, you ask a passing albatross to verify the whale's exact ages. It replies by not landing for months, which is a very albatross way of saying, mind your own spreadsheet. The open Pacific rehearses abundance in drafts and revisions. Upwelling streaks the water with teal, where wind pulls surface layers aside and deep nutrients climb. Krill gather like weather. Anchovies scribble silver graffiti. Tuna arrive dressed as missiles. Makos erase distance with angles you feel in your teeth. None of this submits quotas or files GDP reports. because none of this knows nets with intentions. That absence is not kindness, it's simply the default predation. Sharp prey, clever the ledger balancing in teeth and time. Historians still argue whether the first truly globalized fishery collapse in our world was North Atlantic cod in the 1990s, or whether medieval herring busts qualify as earlier cautionary tales. Here, there is no debate, only winters that teach fish to be fish, and summers that reward them for remembering. You sink, and the light velvets out. At 300 meters, the colors faint. At 1,000, they leave you with indigo and the soft ticking of your own breath. Then the deep starts throwing parties. No dawn can interrupt siphonophores, long as buses, chandeliers of comb jellies, combing rainbows from their own cilia lanternfish, commuting like a galaxy with an HR department. On a ridge, a vent field works under no sun at all. Black smokers, vent metals, and heat-white chimneys exhale bicarbonate. Bacteria eat the chemistry and build food from stone mainstream anchor from the textbooks in 1977 on your timeline. We first met this chemosynthesis carnival along the Galapagos Rift. Here, nobody writes a paper. Tube worms just thrive, red plumes robust as flags at halftime. Back in the shallows where light is an everyday thing, reefs make neighborhoods out of limestone. Without nutrient surges from farmlands, without coastal dredging, and without a fossil fuel spike, changing the ocean's pH faster than coral can spell. Aragonite bleaching becomes what it used to be. Stress in a fierce year, not a foreclosure. Corals shuffle their algal partners recover and keep scaffolding. Crown-of-thorns starfish still show up because starfish have their own ambitions, but outbreaks never hit the explosive runoff-fed scale from your other world. Parrotfish chomp coral and tiny drumroll poop beaches. Much of that talcum white sand you squished between your toes in a more familiar reality was recycled reef. Joke 2, you try to thank a passing parrotfish for last century's beach vacation. It acknowledges your gratitude by continuing to chew a rock. The Atlantic has its own rooms. The Sargasso Sea lies like a slow amber quilt. Sargassum rafts linked into floating suburbs where eels begin secret lives and baby turtles practice looking older than they are. Gulf Stream. Warmth ribbon carries Portuguese man-o'-war sails. Petrels stitch black punctuation marks into sea foam. On banks and shelves left unfurrowed by trawls that never exist. Deep-water corals. Lophelia. Black corals slow as geologic patience stand ancient and unharmed as intricate as frost. As breakable as promises you never had to make. Where rivers greet the sea without cities to inspect them, estuaries bloom into classrooms for everything with gills. Salt marshes accordion with tides. Mudflats write in bird tracks and crab signatures. Mangroves in the tropics hold their ground on stilts. Nurseries for needlefish snappers and opinions. Seagrass meadows ripple like green silk and exhale oxygen you could almost name. Manatees and dugongs mow them politely. The Mediterranean monk seal naps in caves and then swims out with a whiskered frown that means good boundaries. The Caribbean monk seal is not a ghost here. It simply is sleek present. Another note in the chord. Debates survive even in a better-behaved sea. Historians still argue whether early mariners' sea serpent chronicles were oarfish glimpses, whale trains in a mood, or logbooks embellished to keep bored crews entertained. Biologists still argue over how many regional dialects, humpback songs imply about culture, and whether these memes hop oceans like catchy summer anthems. Your job isn't to settle any of it. Your job is to float and listen while the water makes room for your outline. At the literal edge, Antarctica bites into wind and returns it colder. Penguin highways crease the snow from rookeries to leads. Leopard seals patrol as if auditioning for charismatic menace. In your other world, krill swarms carry the Southern Ocean on their little backs and flutter down when the ice blooms. Here, the same but louder, no industrial pumps gone fishing for pink confetti. The pack ice shrinks and spreads according to the planet's tilt and the breath of circumpolar winds. When it fractures, it sounds like a cathedral thinking out loud. surface again into evening, and the sea starts writing in sparks. A shoal moves under your knees, and the water scribbles, light bioluminescence, cold fire. Short-lived punctuation, born whenever agitation jostles the right chemistry. You trail a hand and sign your name in green. A gull drops in behind you as if to critique your penmanship, then reconsiders when it realizes you have no snacks. Joke 3. You offer it a generous helping of respect for boundaries. It files a complaint with a single irritated squawk and goes to steal a fish from a tern instead. You lie back and let the swell borrow your spine. Overhead, the first stars tap on, like distant ship lanterns, from a dream you aren't having. The ocean is not kind, not cruel, only enormous and exacting. It keeps a tidy memory of wind, moon, and geography, and it has the patience to make these into weather you can lean on. Without our nets, bottles, and curious noises, it hums at its preferred volume. You breathe with it slow in long out and feel the whole planet's metronome take your pulse. You come ashore from that calm, glowing ocean and walk into a world written in green and gold, where sunlight breaks into leaf letters and the understory smells like rain that hasn't happened yet. The first thing you notice is that the forest doesn't sit still. It breathes in clearings, whispers down treefall corridors, and laughs softly crackling when lightning signs its name across a ridge. There are no chainsaws here, no rakes, no drip torches, no polite little prescribed burn notices tacked to trailheads. Fire belongs to the weather, and grazing belongs to the mouths that evolved for it. And the two together choreograph the planet's mosaics, the way tide and wind choreograph beaches. You cross a longleaf pine savanna where trunks rise like columns, spaced by some generous architect. Wiregrass brushes your shins, and the pines wear plates of armor-thick bark, high crowns that shrug off the kind of ground fire. Lightning throws down on summer afternoons, mainstream anchor, steady as resin. Ecosystems like this, and like lodgepole and jack pine farther north, evolved with frequent lightning-ignited burns. And in many conifer species, serotinous cones that wait for heat to spill seeds. Without us, the interval stays close to the old rhythm, not smothered into fuel-choked silence by suppression, not turned frenetic by power line sparks and stray campfires, just weather and vegetation keeping time together. Step from that into oak savanna, and then into closed woodland, and then into prairie. The edges are not fences, but gradients that breathe. Where herds graze hard bison in the plains, horses and antelope in rain, shadows elephants across broad African flats. The grass stands short and clean, and fires check themselves at the buffet line. Where mouths are fewer and stems taller, flames run farther, pausing at river fingers and rocky brows. You watch wildebeest in your mind's rearview mirror. Remember Section 3? Finding fresh green on last week's burn, and think pyroherbivory, the old duet of fire creating salad bars and herbivores mowing future fuel. Joke 1. You briefly consider hiring a zebra as your lawn service. The zebra declines your HOA application with a snort and a fabulous mane flip. The boreal belt smells different spruce pitch birch sugar and a cold that edits your thoughts. Here, crown fires sweep like weather fronts every few human lifetimes, turning black spruce cathedrals into charcoal sketch and sky, then into the bright green handwriting of poplar and aspen, then back into somber conifer hymnals. On your timeline, people worry about megafires fed by excess fuel and drought, stressed by climate spikes. Here, the return intervals and sizes hover around the old averages because the atmosphere hasn't been pushed off its balance beam. Black-backed woodpeckers appear as if conjured by charcoal drilling beetle larvae with gleeful industry. A quirky tidbit catches your sleeve. Fire beetles melanophila carry infrared sensors on their bodies and can find a new burn from miles away, arriving like tiny auditors who only do hot cases. Slide to Mediterranean slopes, where summer writes the words "thin rain budget" across every hill. Chaparral carries oils the way eucalypts do, and lightning comes mostly in stingy autumn storms. In between shrubs, Hardened leaves turn themselves into armor, and seeds wait for smoke to whisper now. The absence of matches means fewer off-season sparks, fewer human-made starts that outrun weather's plan. Yet the plants still remember fire in their bones. Some germinate after chemical cues in ash. Some resprout from burl hearts so stubborn you want to take notes for your next Monday. Historians still argue whether many modern fire-prone shrublands were expanded or maintained by millennia of human burning. In this world, their boundaries answer more to slope soil and lightning isochrones than to campfire folklore. You step into South America's Cerrado, a vast gallery of trees perched on termite-built plinths and grasses that wear lightning like an old acquaintance. Rhea ghosts stitch the distance. Maned wolves move through the amber with legs like exclamation points. Termite mounds raise little red cities, their chimneys breathing for the underground, like lungs that keep the whole savanna from wheezing. Fire grazes here too low quick, and often enough to keep woody encroachment at a polite simmer. Your step counter, which has been dramatic since the glacier badge pings achieved, did not try to herd an anteater. You accept with dignity. Grasses own more of the world than you remember. See for grasses. Those warm season dynamos hum under sun like solar panels, with ambitions an evolutionary shift that began spreading in the late Miocene and helped pry open forests into savannas. Mainstream fact-stable carbon isotopes in ancient soils, paleosols, record that grassy ascendancy, a planet-level wardrobe change written in stone. Where rains are summer-strong, C4 lawns keep their cool. Where winters matter more, C3 grasses hold courts of their own. Either way, blades build fuel that lightning can read roots, sow soil into cloth that resists the first rude kick of erosion, and grazers translate calories into motion that redraws the map every dawn. You notice how edges breed invention. In forest gaps where an old giant fell, saplings sprint fungi, throw up ephemeral fruit, and butterflies behave like confetti with a mission. On prairie ball woodland seams, oaks wear fire scars like medals and push new shoots from underground bud banks, a botanical savings account that laughs at flame. In older conifer stands, ground lichens map quiet with pale letters, then vanish under snow, and the paw prints of a lynx you will not see until it decides. The planet does not like monocultures. It likes patchwork quilts that have already survived a few wash cycles. Fires here don't become the modern headline monsters because the fuel is rarely stacked in cathedral loads, and the sparks arrive mostly with storms that bring their own endings. Beavers, your favorite accidental hydrologists, from earlier lace valleys with wet breaks where flames lose interest. Ponds stitched like punctuation that says, slow down. Elephants knock holes in thickets that work as irregular fire breaks. Bison plow snow into weird sculptures that will become moisture pockets in spring. You could almost believe the whole cast got together and agreed on a safety plan. Joke 2, a beaver at a spillway slaps a tail in your direction, which you choose to hear as we were in committee for 6 hours about this. Please take minutes next time. Not every puzzle is solved by watching a single afternoon. Ecologists still argue whether many savanna forest mosaics are bistable either. State can persist under the same climate, flipped by the history of fire and grazing, or whether climate and soil alone shoulder most of the explanation. In this world without our matches and axes, the experiment runs clean, and the answer seems to be both depending where you stand and for how long you watch. Feedbacks matter. Once grass dominates, it invites flame. Once shade deepens, it dampens fuel and invites its own future. Time does the rest. North again, you find sequoias that learned a long patience. Without trails and traffic, their groves feel like libraries found by accident. Cones rattle overhead. A dry lightning storm strolls through. Ground fire licks and moves on. Seedlings dare the ash with little green flags, and you think about how in your world we had to light careful fires to undo a century of smothering. Here the trees keep their appointment calendars without us. In the east, an airy oak hickory woodland dapples a morning made of thrush music. In the afternoon, a thunderhead underlines the ridgeline and writes a quick readable line of flame that hurries through leaf litter and leaves the trunks with new biographies. At night, something odd and useful happens in a fresh burned scar. Morels push through like small miracles wearing crinkled hats. You sip smoke on the air and remember dinner back home. The forest does not provide a reservation. A barred owl declares who cooks for you into the new openness, and deer tiptoe to lick mineral at the ash's edge. Quirky footnote materializes at your elbow in the dark stories from Australia about firehawks, kites, and falcons seen carrying smoldering sticks to flush prey from unburned grass. Biologists are collecting accounts and arguing about proof. You keep your eyebrows raised and your hair unsinged because even without us, the world enjoys a rumor. By dawn, green wins a few inches. Sprouters sprout cedars, seed grazers go to work, and the char starts fading under the footnotes of hooves and paws. You rub soot between finger and thumb. It smells like yesterday edited into tomorrow. It smells like recipe and reset, and the kind of memory that doesn't need a calendar invite. Joke 3, you consider bottling Eau de Patch Burn No. 7 and decide the market research group of 1U is enthusiastic but smokily impractical. You end the day on a ridge where prairie sails to the horizon, stitched with cool shadows from bur oak copses, and the wind plays the grass like strings, low, insistent, forgiving. Somewhere far off, lightning puts down a period that will, by next week, turn into a sentence of green. You breathe it in, the old duet of spark and tooth, and feel the planet's pulse steady under your feet, a tempo you can sleep to, because it doesn't need you, only your quiet. Islands greet you like side quests. The main map forgot, edges curled. Rules remixed, gravity of expectation, turned down a notch, so bodies try new ideas. With no ships to spill stowaways, and no dockside cats rehearsing extinction, the laboratories stay open late. Your first lesson comes on a black lava beach, where a tortoise the size of a coffee table parks itself with the existential poise of a philosopher. The Galapagos are busy without being crowded. Marine iguanas sneeze salt in little glitter storms. Land iguanas walk like they're late to a cactus appointment. Finches test beaks against seeds as if tools were songs. Mainstream anchor to tuck in your pocket. The island rule, sometimes called Foster's rule, says big mainland animals tend to dwarf on islands, while small animals often gigantize. Elephants become pony-sized mice, become grapefruit with opinions. You look at the tortoise, which ignored that memo, and decide rules are more like guidelines with a good sense of humor. A cormorant here no longer bothers with flight. Why flap when the pantry is underwater? Wings shrink to elegant paddles. Feathers soak like a wetsuit, and the bird dives with the competence of a seal. Flightlessness shows up over and over wherever wind is optional, and predators are few. Rails swell bright across the Pacific like punctuation marks that forgot how commas work. On Henderson Island, a miniature rail patters around your boots like a wind-up toy that knows secrets. Joke 1, you consider applying for the job of official rail crossing guard. The rail informs you by being a rail that the crossing is all rails all the time. Across a warm hallway of ocean, Madagascar keeps its eccentric museum open. Lemurs own the galleries, from mouse lemurs, bright as espresso shots, to Indri that sing sunrise duets you feel in your ribs. In your world, giant lemurs the size of gorillas vanished under a short, brutal chapter of very recent history. Here they browse calmly, hands graceful faces, thoughtful, turning leaves into long afternoons. Megalodapus the koala lemur leans like a slow argument. Paleopropithecus sloth lemur dangles and reaches with a choreography that makes you breathe slower. Elephant birds stride the open country, huge and shy eggs, massive enough to qualify as furniture. You briefly imagine a crocodile dung sunscreen omelet, and having learned from our earlier scandal, decline with dignity. The fossa lithe cat lean, but a mongoose cousin, ghosts along riverine shade, the island's top mammal carnivore writing in cursive. Historians still argue whether medieval travelers' tales of rockbirds lifting elephants were garbled encounters with elephant birds, or simply campfire bragging. Either way, nobody here lifts anyone larger than a coconut crab can carry. New Zealand exhales a green breath shaped like cloud. No native land mammals beyond small bats. The rest is birds and the dinosaur, who politely refused to leave Tuatara, a reptile with a third parietal eye under its scalp. An old story told softly on cool nights. Moas stand like mobile haystacks, heads busy in the brows and the sky sharpens. When Haast's eagle arrives, wings, dark talons like forged questions. The only raptor you've met that makes the phrase apex guild feel personal. Kakapo, the world's heaviest parrot, trundles by with the scent of honey and clean cupboards. Their musky perfume is a real thing, and somehow makes you want to fold linens. Kia, those alpine mechanics, still test zippers and invent mischief from pure physics. Joke 2, you hide your trail mix behind a rock. A Kia does not read your privacy policy and files a beak-based Freedom of Information request. On smaller islands, the experiments get stranger and more precise. The Channel Islands, off California in your world, host dwarf foxes, miniature dog cousins that probably arrived with people. Subtract people and you still get the principle elsewhere. Dwarf otters on imagined reefs, dwarf deer in Mediterranean pockets, where forests close ranks, and real wonderful dwarf proboscideans beneath your feet in the limestone of Sicily, Malta, Crete, and Cyprus. In this timeline, they keep evolving with the tides of connection and separation because the seas still breathe and land bridges still play peekaboo. Wrangel Island, north of Siberia, continues to hide its pocket mammoths deep into the Holocene here, not as ghosts, but as neighbors. The geneticists in your head whisper about inbreeding depression, while the wind says this population has time, which is better medicine than any lab could ship. Hawaii hums like a jewelry box wound by rain. Honey creepers radiate across elevation bands. Curved beaks, straight beaks, scarlet yellow olive. Each a little thesis on nectar or seeds. In your world, avian malaria rode in with mosquitoes that arrived with ships. In this world, the disease never gets its boarding pass, so the high forests aren't amputated by altitude. Moa nalo. Those flightless big-billed ducks that once browsed like rabbits with honking privileges still haunt lowland fernlands, their bills built like garden tools. The Alala Hawaiian crow remains a forest voice, not a reintroduction project. You walk softly among ohia and koa and discover that island tameness is still a policy. Birds hop closer instead of fleeing because nothing here has taught them about teeth arriving from overseas. Your step counter forever dramatic dings achieved resisted petting a nene. Good job. Over in the Indian Ocean, you step onto Mauritius expecting a bird-shaped punchline and find instead a dignified hefty pigeon strolling through ebony shade. The dodo never becomes a symbol of extinction. It remains a symbol of please pass the fallen fruit. Its cousin, the Rodriguez solitaire, still throws its weight and that bony wing knob around when territory gets personal. Aldabra's atolls continue to host tortoises that wear time like armor. They grind mangrove apples with a patience that makes clocks feel silly. St. Helena's insects. The giant earwig, the stag beetles go about their clicky business under tree ferns and basalt ledges, never asked to compete with boot soles or sprayed by boredom. In the Caribbean ground, sloths keep writing slow paragraphs into island forests. Megalochnus in Cuba, Acrotochnus in Hispaniola, climbing browsing nursing generations into caves striped with mineral, not rumors. Giant owls, Ornimegalonyx. Work the night shift legs, long faces round wingbeats spare because an ambush is better than a chase when trees are close and light is honest. Hutia's curly-tailed rodents, with the self-esteem of small goats, browse beach scrub and look at you like a teacher considering extra credit. The Bahamas still hold songbirds, like confetti in winter. Nobody rakes the mangroves into golf courses. Bonefish shine and bolt and shine again. Flores and its neighbors behave like myth fragments that got along. Komodo dragons own sunlit ridges, tongues tasting stories brought by wind. With no goats to chew hills into slides and no villages to bait the dragons into gossip, the monitor remains simply what it is. A reptile that remembers Pleistocene rules. On Cyprus, dwarf hippos grunt in saline pools behind dunes and leave the cutest four-toed signatures you will ever see. You do not follow them. You have learned. On Mediterranean islets, giant rodents and giant lizards fill niches that on continents belong to small carnivores and foxes. Disharmony, the ecological shorthand for island faunas. Missing entire guilds feels less like lack and more like music arranged for a different ensemble. Mainstream fact to keep you grounded. Most islands filter colonists by chance and physiology. Things that fly, float, or drift arrive. First birds, bats, insects, plant seeds. Large terrestrial mammals rarely make it unless seas fall or a rare log raft gamble pays off. That's why so many island mammal faunas are bats and, more bats. You stand at dusk in Samoa, and the sky fills with flying foxes, leather umbrellas commuting to breadfruit, and you think appropriately of capes and late-night snack runs, quirky tidbit coconut crabs. The world's largest land arthropods climb trunks like slow thieves, steal anything that smells faintly like food, and have been documented. Hauling pots and pans away from unattended camps. You lock your imaginary beaver cafe mug out of pure reflex. Joke 3, a coconut crab eyes your sandal. You offer it respect for boundaries and back away at a pace both parties can endorse. Even here, the footnotes keep whispering. Historians still argue whether the famous lighthouse cat Tibbles truly single-pawed the extinction of Lyell's wren on Stevens Island, or whether people and several cats share the credit. Remove lighthouse, remove cats, and the wren still sings thinly from grass and stone at dusk. Biologists still argue whether dodo depictions were caricatured by artists who never saw one or faithful portraits of a bird perfectly at home in a world that made room for heft and calm. Paleontologists still argue over how quickly rails lose flight after colonizing a few millennia, sometimes less. And you watch a rail decide that running is better than flapping and nod, as if you've attended the seminar. The island pattern seen in a single glance is audacious and tender tameness, where fear would be wasted specialization, where generalists cannot pay rent. Gigantism and dwarfism as strategies for rationed real estate. Without us, these experiments rehearse into performances, then traditions. Song dialects settle. Beak shapes harden. Tortoise shells write topographies shaped by hills, fog, and favorite puddles. You take the hint. You lower your voice until even the wind has to lean closer to hear. Night folds neatly. Far offshore, a lighthouse never exists, so stars do the work. Milky Way splashed from reef to ridge navigation, old as breath. You lie down where pandanus pins the sand and listen to geckos chirp like small rubber toys with excellent timing. Somewhere a kiwi snuffles in leaf litter. Somewhere else, an elephant bird steps once, twice, and rests like a boulder with opinions. Your step counter has the good sense to go quiet. The tide writes soft math at your toes. You remember Beaver Dam's glacier badges and our sunscreen fiasco, and you think islands are what happens when the world tries out poetry in private. You close your eyes and promise not to tell. You wake to a skyline with no right angles, only silhouettes drawn by teeth tides and weather. Morning fog lifts off a broad wetland, and you realize you're looking at rush hour, just not yours. Beaver canals darken the water like ink strokes. Lodges bump up as shaggy domes. Willow coppice grows in rings, the way neighborhoods grow around good bakeries. You drift a hand through reed tassels and hear the whole district hum frogs, vamping bass ducks, trading gossip dragonflies, piloting neon commas. There are no boulevards, but there are routes. The low, smooth slides where muskrat bellies polished the bank. The zigzag swales where deer choose dry feet. The braided shallows where beavers stash winter groceries. Joke 1, you clear your throat and ask for a latte at the nearest lodge. The barista slaps the water with a tail, and your order is efficiently denied. If concrete never rises, architecture does not vanish. It spreads its roots. Termite mounds stand like terracotta cathedrals, ventilated by physics. Instead of thermostats, some aligned north-south, like compass needles to smooth out sun and shade. Deep inside, farmers tend white gardens fungus combs, grown on chewed grass. The old macroterms, partnership that has been running longer than any human dynasty. Ant highways lift across the savanna, on woven bridges and underleaf tunnels. Leafcutter workers, parading green parasols to a fungus they feed with patience and mandibles. Quirky tidbit for your notebook. Some ants bring tiny cows' aphids into their stalls and milk them for honeydew, with the same seriousness you bring to breakfast. The zoning board here is pheromone and touch. The building code is does it work? Under your boots, the forest runs its own utilities. Mycorrhizal threads stitch tree-to-tree fungal fibers, swapping sugars for minerals, ferrying chemical hints of drought or beetles. You crouch and pinch soil that smells like rain rehearsing, and the ground seems to whisper cooperative. Historians still argue whether Sodalhuyuk, that 9th-7th millennium BCE honeycomb of plastered rooms in your old world, was a true city or an oversized village. The forest around you declines to comment, preferring to keep the debate to roots. Scientists for their part would be busy here. Some say this wood wide web behaves like a neighborhood internet. Others caution it's more like a crowded market where everyone barters and nobody hosts a central server. Either way, the lights stay on without wires. At sea, the grand skyline is limestone. Reefs raise architraves out of moonlight and dust polyp by polyp buttressing their walls with the steady arithmetic of aragonite. In your other timeline, coral covers less than 1% of the ocean floor, yet shelters roughly a quarter of marine species. That mainstream anchor still stands only looser in the shoulders. No dredging, no nutrient. Floods, no chemical mood swing to sour the water. Parrotfish keep their masonry tidy, and yes, still manufacture beaches, one bite at a time while branching. Corals loft courtyards for damselfish that defend algae gardens with the zeal of tiny landlords. Out past the reef flat, a pufferfish spins a mandala in the sand, 6 feet across scalloped rims, pebbles carefully placed a courtship palace that looks like a crop circle built by patience. Nobody zones it, nobody finds it. It will last until the next storm edits it into memory. You pass under a cliff, honeycombed with mud domes. Cliff swallows have built a cul-de-sac of gourds, each entrance a precise oval, each home chatter bright. On the far side of the continent, sociable weavers crown acacia branches with apartment complexes, so sprawling they make shade big enough for a herd. Some sections stay occupied for a century or more. Roofs, patched through generations, floors, insulated with a thatch that squeaks softly when chicks roll in their sleep. Joke 2, you try to join the HOA. A weaver blinks, weighs your feather situation, and stamps application incomplete. Cities never rise here, but density happens anyway. Prairie dog towns freckle shortgrass with doors each mound a conversation pit, bubbling with chirps that mean hawk, coyote, or you again. Burrowing owls squat in the vacancies like snarky subletters. In the alpine picas, scurry hay into neat drying stacks, fodder libraries for winters when the sky forgets color. In caves, bats thrum like a single inhalation, stretched over miles their guano-building terraces that feed cave beetles, crickets, and a patient archaeology of seasons. A whale falls in the deep, and an entire burrow rises overnight. Hagfish worms that farm sulfide crabs, eel pouts, an economy printed on a skeleton running for decades until the last calcium IOU is paid. You walk a ridge and realize some architecture is invisible unless you know to look. Bowerbirds don't build nests with eggs in mind. They build galleries for taste. Satin bowerbirds prefer blue and will drag the sky down in bottle caps if you give them half a chance. Here with no plastic, they thread rare petals and beetle elytra, arranging forced perspective runways, that make them look bigger when they dance in the center. You watch a male adjust a shell by a thumb's width. Perfectionism you can feel from 10 paces, and then rehearse a routine so earnest your sleepiness smiles. Roads never grid the map, but paths braid anyway. Elephant corridors learned by generations and kept open by memory. Caribou lines over tundra hooves clicking like bead curtains. Penguin highways from rookery to lead, pressed glossy by 1,000 belly slides. Bridges exist fallen logs, crossing creeks. Mangrove roots lacing water, and under high tides, schools of fish turning in unison to carry light across a channel. You step lightly and let the planet's infrastructure take the lead. There is no detour signage, only seasonal suggestion. For contrast, you remember your old world's mainstream fact: the first urban skylines, mud brick, and monument arrive in places like Uruk, around the 4th millennium BCE temples and tablets, and the early bureaucracy of grain and debt. Here, the granaries belong to squirrels and acorn woodpeckers, oak trunks stippled with thousands of carefully jammed nuts, a larder that clicks like a beat abacus when the wind moves. There's no writing, unless you count the scratches where bears combed for cambium, or the way waves recopy shells onto sand. The loudest ledger is fire on bark, and the neat arithmetic of annual rings. Not every grandeur is dry. In temperate shallows, eelgrass meadows knit the seafloor into green cursive, attenuating storm energy, exactly the way a well-placed park softens a city block. Estuaries become nurseries where shrimp and juvenile fish practice being older, invisible curtains of salt gradient, organizing who thrives where and when. Oyster reefs rim old shorelines like low stone walls. Each shell stacks a neighborhood and clears water as it breathes. Octopuses gather in rubble fields. Octopolis-style tolerating neighbors longer than textbooks once expected, excavating and decorating their front doors with scallop shells, as if someone whispered curb appeal. Here and there you meet ancient infrastructure humming along without a maintenance budget. Beavers that pond a valley turn drought into inconvenience rather than catastrophe. When lightning lays fire through their mosaic wetlands, say no thanks, and the flame obeys. Termite mounds wick heat and moisture so skillfully, you could nap against one and feel the day's stress leave your shirt. Coral cays grow ring by ring, sometimes fast enough to keep their heads above seas that lazily lift during warm interglacials. You sit with your knees up and think the best architecture negotiates with entropy rather than pretending it can be sued. Joke 3 arrives when your step counter, eternally dramatic awards achieved, did not try to lease a studio in a prairie dog complex. You accept, though, the Neighborhood Watch Committee one black-tailed sentinel chirping from a half-meter pedestal seems open to visitors who keep their hands where everyone can see them. You wave. It chirps coyote just to stay sharp. Dusk drops like silk. Fireflies come on in scattered bylaws. A beaver trails a V behind it between cattails that have never met a ditcher. From the ridge termite, spires throw long shadows, and beyond them, a grove sinks its breathing through underground trades. You can't see, but can almost taste phosphorus nitrogen. Carbon, the alphabet of staying alive. You think of the crocodile dung sunscreen fiasco we promised never to repeat, of glacier badges and aurora shawls of islands that kept their poetry private. A city never rises here, but something older does a fabric dense enough to sleep in, woven by countless small agreements, and no charters at all. You tuck your chin, let the planet hold the night watch, and allow the dark to do its quiet work. You wake with an itch you didn't earn, one seed tick under your sock. A reminder that life here includes other lives that find you delicious. The world without us still runs public health. It just doesn't issue press releases. Parasites and pathogens braid through every food web, trimming excess, testing immune systems, and quietly deciding who eats, who breeds, and who takes a dignified bow. You step into early light, slap your ankle once, and accept that you are walking through a hospital cafeteria and graduate seminar all at once, where herds thicken microbes get opportunities. Wildebeest noses touch buffalo crowd crossings. Elk nuzzle calves, and the unseen passengers trade boarding passes, viruses, bacteria, worms. Yet without corrals, feedlots, or ships to turbocharge introductions, most diseases stay local, a weather pattern, rather than a planet-spanning headline. In your other world, a bovine morbillivirus called rinderpest stormed Africa in the late 1800s with cattle and wrecked wildlife. Here, no cattle arrive, so no rinderpest does either, and the Serengeti's grazer numbers write their own steady music. Mainstream anchor for your sleeve in the timeline you remember, rinderpest became the first animal disease eradicated in 2011, an echo of smallpox's human-side finale in 1980. In this world, the famous post-eradication wildebeest boom and the way it rewrote fire regimes never needs a vaccine to begin. It simply exists because the disease never does. Not all hazards ride in on hooves. Bacillus anthracis sleeps in soil like a dry, dusty genie waking, after floods or droughts, to fell a hippopod or thin a zebra fringe. Short, brutal pulses that feed vultures, beetles and floodplains. Rabies hums in bats, and wild carnivores circling quiet reservoirs in foxes, skunks, mongooses. Without domestic dogs as a megaphone, it remains patchy, terrifying for the unlucky, irrelevant for most. Avian influenza still rehearses its endless remix in wild waterfowl, but with no poultry barns to amplify it into fireworks, it is mostly a cold wind through reeds. The amphibian chorus tells a softer story. In your world, Batrachochytrium, chytrid fungi, BD, and later Bisol road trade routes, and spattered sadness across tropical and temperate hillsides. Here, without global pet markets and cargo holds, strains stay provincial. Some valleys never meet the worst versions. Frogs still sicken where the fungus is native, but they also adjust skin peptides, learn new tricks. Symbiotic bacteria pull weight because the stress arrives on a local schedule. Historians still argue whether the earliest BD pandemics began in Asia-Africa or everywhere at once in slow motion. Without us, the debate loses urgency and becomes a natural history footnote rather than a eulogy. Meanwhile, parasites do what they've always done: manage ambition. Ticks and biting flies siphon energy and transmit little memos, trypanosomes in tsetse belts, writing margins for who grazes where. Babesias and anaplasmas, riding deer into subtle fevers that slow the overeager. Liver flukes, shuttling through snails and ungulates like bureaucrats who love paperwork. In the shallows, a fish opens its mouth, and a tongue-eating isopod Cymathoa waves hello from the position it illegally sublet. Quirky tidbit horrifyingly tidy, the louse replaces the fish's tongue and collects rent in blood. You nod queasy respect paid and refocus on the horizon. Behavior isn't immune to editing. In dry grass, a mouse with Toxoplasma gondii in its brain seems strangely cavalier about cat scent. The parasite, which requires felids to finish its life cycle, nudges caution down a notch, so dinner becomes destiny. With no house cats, the cast is strictly wild caracals and servals, bobcats and pumas, and the dance stays local. Under a leaf, an ant climbs a grass blade like a pilgrim and bites down at the death grip point. Ophiocordyceps has rewritten its marching orders and will by afternoon bloom a tiny periscope from the ant's head to shower spores onto new boots. You whisper zombie and promise not to start a franchise. Joke 1 your step counter dings achieved did not follow the ant's career advice, which frankly is a relief. Seas hum their own medicine. Corals still bruise from disease now and then, but without acidification or fertilizer surges. Outbreaks shrug themselves smaller. Sea stars sometimes waste in warm spells, but the pulses look like weather hiccups, not regional collapses. Kelp forests still lace bruised kelp flies into gull dinners. Otters keep urchins honest. And the microbial rain, falling through water columns, viral shrapnel called the viral shunt, recycles carbon and nutrients with ruthless efficiency that would make a city sanitation department applaud. If it could. It cannot. The Octopus Committee vetoed the parade. Back on land, you pass a deer carcass and watch the invisible ledger settle itself in minutes. Blowflies arrive first green and metallic. Dermestid beetles file paperwork for later. A thin thread of bacteria fog, smell only your nose knows, rise as enzymes write dissolving poems. Vultures. Those antiseptic angels land and sterilize the scene with stomach acid so fierce it makes cholera cry. The pathogens dream of using them as taxis, fails as always, because vulture guts are a locked-room mystery with no happy endings for invaders. Joke 2, a marabou stork gives you the "I brought my own napkin" look, and you decide that lunch is a social construct you can postpone. The question you keep circling is balance. Without planes, highways, and cargo bays, disease webs look like archipelagos, connected but separated often by climate, sometimes by mountains, frequently by the sheer inconvenience of distance. Populations ebb when a parasite finds them dense, then flow when immunity and survivors seed the next generation. The phrase herd immunity loses its human news sting and returns to its original plain meaning. Enough bodies have met this thing that it no longer finds easy pickings. You watch bighorn sheep tilt horns in a high basin and think about pneumonia that in your world sometimes storms through herds after domestic sheep share pasture. Here, the meeting never happens, and the basin keeps its lungs clear. Debates persist like old songs. Historians still argue whether the Black Death of the 14th century was solely Yersinia pestis in flea-bitten rats, or a mean duet with pneumonic transmission and other pathogens. They argue over mortality 30%, 50% more, and over how it rewired Europe. In this alternate quiet, the arguments survive as thought experiments without lived pain. The underlying lesson remains elegant, and a little sharp density and movement give microbes microphones. Remove one and you mute the room. Remove both and you return sound to conversation volume. Mosquitoes. The tiny Air Force still draw maps in dusk light, and malarias still thread bird blood in the tropics like red embroidery. But the most explosive meeting, the one between invasive mosquitoes and naive island birds, rarely happens. Hawaii keeps its honey creepers intact because nobody gave 80s a ride across the ocean. The alala remains a corvid with opinions rather than a conservation acronym. In the Old World, tropics anopheles still pass plasmodium among monkeys and apes. Some primates wear sick days, others wear genetic scars that say we met this once and survived. You tilt your hat at a troop of colobus napping and wish their spleens well. Not all strategy is microbe-side. Animals load up on plant medicines. Chimpanzees chew bitter Vernonia piths when gutworms heckle them. Parrots visit clay licks to bind alkaloids and heavy metals. Elephants break specific barks in dry seasons and then walk straighter, cooler. Monarch caterpillars feed on milkweed that doses them with cardenolides, giving future birds a bad afternoon, and the caterpillars a conditional peace. Quirky side quest, woolly bear caterpillars in the Arctic freeze solid most winters, and thaw to nibble again for several years before finally pupating. A slow immune budget paid carefully cashed late. Joke 3, you try to self-medicate with a dignified handful of willow leaves and rapidly remember, you are not a beaver. You settle for water and humility. When you zoom out, disease looks less like malice and more like punctuation commas that slow a booming population periods that close a crowded chapter ellipses in which immunity matures and births stagger. Sometimes the marks are cruel, sometimes oddly generous. Always they are precise. Ecologists argue over whether predators or parasites do more day-to-day regulating, and the honest answer is a nod toward both braided. On floodplains, fluke life cycles depend on snails, fish, and herons cooperating unknowingly. On tundra, tapeworms rely on lemmings sprinting through foxbellies and back into owl pellets as beads in a loop. The choreography is Baroque. Dusk sifts in. Midges halo your head like a questionable crown. Swallows write curlicues through them and cash their checks on the wing. Somewhere a bat clocks in and begins auditing insects with sonar. In a thicket, a mouse shakes off a brief fever and resumes its undergrass commute none the worse and slightly wiser. You pull your collar up, no crocodile dung sunscreen required, thank you, and let the night's chemistry settle. Out here, plagues are not headlines, they're housekeeping. The world cleans itself with tiny teeth and tinier keys, and by morning, the ledger will read, as always, paid in full. You tune your stride to the planet's longer breath and feel how weather stacks into climate, the way waves stack into swell. Daily breezes nested in seasons, nested in decades, centuries, and the long drum of ice. Noon heat pulls a sea breeze across a headland. Afternoon, thunderheads stand up and clear their throats. Winter steps in with a frosty memo that no one disputes. Above all, that the big metronomes keep time, tilt, wobble, and orbital stretch, changing the amount of sunlight that lands where and when and for how long. You don't hear the gears, you feel them in the way tree lines inch and shorelines negotiate with the moon. Monsoons still write whole continents in water. The Indian Ocean breathes onto land each summer and back to sea in winter. The West African monsoon pumps green up the Sahel like a heartbeat. In a world without our aerosols hazing the sky or our soil dusting the air, where plows bit too hard, the pulses look closer to the old script. Years of bounty, years of slant-shouldered patience, nothing permanent. Across the Pacific, trade winds tighten and relax. El Niño and La Niña take turns tilting the table. Anchoveta banquets become fasting days, and then banquets again. Rain bands shuffle. Cyclones practice embroidery on different coasts. Joke 1, you try to file a formal complaint about El Niño with the Pacific. The ocean stamps your letter received and sets it adrift, which counts as both customer service and poetry. Volcanoes speak whenever they want. A far mountain goes sudden and tall ash, shouldering into the stratosphere. Weeks later, the light turns thin and peaches out at noon. Sulfate aerosols bounce sunlight back to space, and the whole planet cools a whisper. In your remembered world, Tambora's 1815 eruption drew a mainstream underline the year without a summer crop failures and hungry headlines. Here, the signal is still there, but the audience is different. Alpine meadows squeeze seed budgets. Penguins shift their molt calendar. Wolves learn that a skinny winter is also a quiet winter. Fireflies flash on schedule anyway because somebody should keep morale up. You pull your collar up and think good cave day, then remember, we promised to retire the crocodile dung sunscreen and congratulate yourself on finally developing taste. Sea ice keeps a dignified diary. In winter, it stitches the Arctic into a continent, and in summer, it sighs itself back into lanes and flows, leaving Polynesia's open water windows where wind current and geography agree. Bearded seals haul out on the punctuation marks. Polar cod grow up under the translucent roof in a nursery of shadow. Bowhead whales follow the leads like commuters who like good acoustics. When winters run longer, ice arches hold fast in cold brims. The glass. When winters slacken, the arches fail and driftways open earlier. None of this is about us. All of it is about salt wind and the stubborn physics of water at 0 degrees C. Down in the black, the Atlantic's overturning circulation carries its quiet freight. Warm surface water rides north, leaks heat to the wind, grows salty and dense under cold skies, sinks and heads home along the abyss, like a courier who prefers night roads. Meltwater freshens the surface some years, and the engine coughs. Storms spin a little differently until salinity and luck reset the machine. Paleoclimatologists still argue whether abrupt ancient coolings, Dansgaard Ischger bursts, and Heinrich ice raft armadas were paced mainly by sea ice feedbacks, ice sheet tantrums, or thresholds in this conveyor's own heart. You don't settle the debate. You kneel at a subpolar shore and listen to the long, low chord the ocean plays when wind and current bow the same string. Dust crosses oceans with a suitcase full of phosphorus. Sahara gusts lift red into the high air. Weeks later, the Amazon's canopy eats that iron and phosphorus like vitamins and says, thank you in green. Mainstream anchor sturdy as a trade route satellite, and field studies in your timeline showed that African dust fertilizes the Amazon and Atlantic. A different year, Asia sneezes Luas into the Pacific and feeds plankton that were waiting for one missing atom. What looks like nuisance at your ankles is subsidy at the scale of basins. You wipe grit from your lip and call it dinner for someone you'll never meet. Mountains breathe with glaciers. In colder centuries, ice steps down the valleys in slow, clean handwriting and carves more room for itself. In warmer centuries, it sits back in cirques and sharpens the skyline. Moraines cuff old positions. Outwash paints plains with stone flour. Proglacial lakes wink into existence and then wink out when the ice remembers an old door. On a high afternoon, you crunch past penitent sword-like snowblades, sculpted by sun and wind, and the field looks like a congregation frozen mid-psalm. Quirky tidbit to save for later in the right weather snow rollers. Form wind folds, sticky new snow into hollow donuts that tumble away on their own until they collapse a pastry event conducted by physics with no pastry chef. Trees answer with inches, not speeches. Treeline climbs 100 meters on a warm-leaning century and offers a wooden yes to every south-facing slope. Then a cold lean pushes needles down again, and subalpine meadows spread a little picnic cloth of flowers and bees. In Scandinavia, birch and pine swap edges. In the Rockies, Engelmann spruce yields a little ground to fir and then takes it back. In the tropics, cloud forests slide by altitude the way you'd slide a dimmer. The map never stops being itself. It just tries on slightly different coats. History still haunts the clouds, even if people never do. In your own world, the phrase Little Ice Age stitches together roughly 1300 to 1850 with paintings of skaters on Dutch canals and frost fairs on the Thames. Historians still argue whether it was global regional patchwork or simply a name we gave to many different chills. Here, cold centuries still gather, but no baker curses the wheat and no diarist compares candles by thickness. Foxes grow plusher otters, fish shorter days. Owls hunt longer twilights. The memory lives in rings, not chronicles. The planet experiments with feedbacks, whether or not anyone writes grant proposals about them. A dryer. Sahara throws more dust. More dust cools a hair. A hair cooler shifts rain south. The Sahara greens at the edges. Dust falls. The needle twitches back. In the Southern Ocean, krill ride the ice edge like a moving factory floor. More ice, more krill, more whales. Less ice, the factory shrinks, and the whales commute farther. In the air above plankton, blooms algae breathe dimethyl sulfide that seeds some clouds. Scientists still argue how strong that claw hypothesis feedback really is, but the smell faintly like a cracked oyster on a hot dog definitely exists. Joke 2, you suggest seeding the clouds with official paperwork instead. A gull steals the file and the sky proceeds unbothered. Sea level continues its stately negotiations. In deep glaciations, it drops plazas of continental shelf into the wind. In interglacials, it leans on barrier islands and makes them roll landward, dune by dune, storm by storm. Mangroves step inland where valleys allow. Salt marshes lay down thick notebooks of peat and wait for next spring. Coral cays build rings tall enough to keep their heads above a calmly rising tide. You walk the old beach 6 kilometers offshore during a low sea stand and hear the waves shushing somewhere out in what used to be the future. Later, in a warm century, you swim over that same path and the fish gossip about your navigation skills. Weather keeps its jokes sharp. The Bora still rips the Adriatic like a tailor fed up with seams. The Mistral scrubs southern France clean enough to taste the rocks. Katabatic winds pour off Antarctica and hand you a hairdo you did not order. Thunder snow writes white applause under purple clouds. Singing dunes boom on dry days with bass notes deep enough to vibrate your ribs, the sand avalanching in layers. Grains rubbing, just so, the whole slope behaving like an instrument you don't understand, but instantly respect. Joke 3 your step counter pings survived unsolicited catabatic makeover, which is the kind of badge you screenshot if you had a phone and reception and friends. Someone in your old world always asked if climate was stable. The honest answer even here is stable enough to raise children if you're a willow, and not at all if you're ice on a headland in April. Change is the point. Species track isotherms uphill and poleward. Some leap gaps on wings, some stall at rivers. Some find refuges tucked in shadowed canyons and outlast a bad century with patience and a seed bank. Predators shadow prey ranges. Parasites shadow hosts. Mosses and lichens seed rock and wait for the weather to blink. By evening, the day's heat gets up and leaves, and the land exhales a cool you can put your face in. Far off, a volcano glows like a coal under ash. Over the desert, noctilucent clouds line the north with pale fish bones, the high ice that shows up in summer twilight, when the upper air is just right. You pick a hollow out of the wind. Remember the glacier badge and the beaver cafe where your order was denied with a tail slap? Think better of any geoengineering pitch to the thunderhead and do the simplest, most time-tested thing this planet ever asked of any traveler. You sleep according to the weather you have. You keep walking, but you lower your volume because the next thing the planet wants to show you is not teeth or weather, it's minds. Not your kind, other kinds. You come to a dusty pan ringed with acacias and watch a family of elephants hold a meeting so quiet you feel rude for breathing. A matriarch steps forward, lifts a branch she stripped smooth days ago, and uses it to scratch a place her trunk can't reach, then switches to fanning a calf's face against flies. Another female pads to a dry channel and digs a neat well. Water bleeds up. Everyone drinks in order like a prayer you can taste. Their feet hum the ground with infrasonic sentences that travel farther than your voice ever will. Calf tries a practice rumble, gets shushed with a trunk hug, tries again better. You think of beaver canals and termite cathedrals and realize cognition has architecture too. Patience, memory etiquette, mainstream anchor to pocket elephants. Pass the mirror test in our world. Recognize themselves. Mourn their dead and keep migration maps that last longer than a single life. Here, with no fences or gunshots to scramble the syllabus, those maps expand into libraries. You veer into the shade, and a raven drops in like a critic with a deadline. It flips a stick, tests the tip, tucks it underfoot, prees a beetle free, and then caches the rest with that amused look corvids perfected before there were people to offend. In a nearby grove, a New Caledonian crow cousin coaxes a hook from a leaf midrib classic wild behavior in your timeline, refined here into neighborhood fashions, and hands it to a fledgling with the gentle snatchiness of all good teachers. Historians still argue whether to call such traditions culture, or to reserve that word for symphonies and sourdough starters. The crow answers by producing a better hook. Joke 1, you try to rent the tool for just a second. The crow quizzes your deposit, your references, and your grasp of leverage, then declines your application with a tidy caw. The parrots make their own noise, which is to say percussion. In a fig-blackened clearing, a palm cockatoo trims a stick to length, inspects the bevel, then drums a hollow trunk in measured phrases. Solo rock, concert courtship, resume, and territorial deed all at once. Quirky tidbit you'll want to brag about: at the non-existent Beaver Cafe, palm cockatoos are the only birds known to manufacture and use drumsticks for music. Kia test knots in a high pass, like locksmiths with jokes. Cockatiels braid contact calls until each pair has a ringtone the other can't ignore. You leave your trail mix in your deepest pocket. You have learned. Meanwhile, parrots in the canopy pry open seeds with the slow competence of bench vices and pass their best tricks to watching juveniles who pretend not to stare. Water signs to you. Out on a smooth bay, bottlenose dolphins commute low and purposeful, some wearing the familiar sponge gloves on their rostra. Another mainstream anchor from your old world, gloving up to root safely for fish in rough seafloors. A calf watches her mother forage that way for months. the habit becomes a dialect. Far offshore orcas thread the seam between kelp and surf, coordinating the slow tidal sabotage of a resting seal surge-retreat surge until the wave does the work. Each pod keeps its recipes. Fish eaters sing in tight musical phrases. Mammal eaters go radio silent, all gesture and timing. Humpbacks sidle in seasons later, and you hear a song that wasn't sung last year. The hook repeats, mutates towards the ocean like a summer hit. Historians still argue whether culture in whales meets the human standard of cumulative ratcheting or cycles in loops. The whales being whales continue to outvote the committee by simply performing. You kneel on a tide flat to listen for clams, and an octopus redecorates the conversation. Veined octopus ambles by under a borrowed coconut shell, then pauses, unsheathes, and arranges 2 half shells into an armor you can't help admiring. A tuskfish swims up and bangs a clam against a favorite anvil stone until dinner opens by contract law. In a rubble plain nearby, several octopuses occupy a neighborhood octopolis by temper and geometry, tolerating neighbors long enough to bicker about property lines with shells. There are no clipboards, no citations. There are displays, color flashes, and sudden cloud puffs of, "I have nothing more to say." Joke 2, you wave and ask for the HOA minutes. 8 arms pantomime talk to our lawyers, and the water laughs in bubbles. On a riverbank, a raccoon feels the world through its hands until you can see memory happening. It rolls, a snail pauses, then rinses it in the shallows. Not because it's fussy, but because the tactile data improve when water loosens grit. The mind here is a file cabinet by textured doors, latches, fingers width. In your world, captive tests showed raccoons recall solutions for years. Here, the lab is a braided backwater, and the exam is every tide. You picture a long, slow experiment where dexterous generalists, raccoons, code is maybe even certain gulls and skuas, push cooperative foraging a notch deeper. Each century, watch, copy, refine, keep. Historians still argue whether cumulative culture needs teaching with intent or whether eager imitation and patient scaffolding will do. The raccoons keep their syllabus as simple as wet hands and stubborn lids. Ants and bees, the planet's quiet cartographers, write in symbols you can see if you sit still. A honeybee returns heavy and rotates into a waggle dance angle to the sun duration. For distance mainstream anchor, straight out of Carl von Frisch, only now performed without forklifts or monocultures distorting the distances. Another bee interrupts, insists on a richer patch, and for a few minutes, the dance floor looks like debate in a language with only 2 words this way. And trust me. On the savanna driver, ants braid living bridges over gaps and then disassemble them when the column passes a problem solved by bodies and software you can smell. If the planet had a patent office, it would be permanently overwhelmed. Back to the elephants before dusk. A juvenile picks up a dry stick and tests it as a metronome tap-tap, then as a probe for a tricky slope poke test step, and finally as a baton to scold a pushy cousin. The matriarch rumbles, and the group forms a loose ring around a sick calf. There are no antibiotics. There is shade touch and social time that slows heartbeats. If the calf dies, the ring will hold a while longer, and the family will return to smell the bones. Weeks from now, a behavior that in your world made us speak the words mourning and ritual, and then argue about their edges. Historians still argue whether words like person should be legal tools or metaphors when we discuss beings who recognize themselves, plan, and grieve. You keep the argument quiet inside your chest and add water to the well. The matriarch dug. You pass under a pine where a young raven has constructed a snowslide on a shaded bank. Belly sleds twice, then revises the slope with analytical pecks until the ride is steeper, faster. Fun. Play everywhere teaches consequences safely. Sea otters carry favorite rocks in their fur pockets. Yes, still delightful, and juveniles show each other better anvils by accident. Kia. Jam twigs into crevices just to pull them out. Then do it again with the timing of pranksters and engineers. A wolf pair cooperates to dislodge an elk on slick scree, then repeats the maneuver next snow. Repetition is the signature of culture, even when nobody writes minutes. Because you asked for jokes, the step counter eternally dramatic, since your glacier badge pings achieved, did not crash the dolphin group chat. You salute the bay and refuse to whistle back. Later, a crow leaves a bottle cap blue feather on your path. You tuck it behind your ear, and your step counter awards, accessorized with dignity. Joke 3 lands. When a parrot, unimpressed with your dignity, imitates your sneeze perfectly from a blind you thought was private, you bow to the mockery. The parrot bows to gravity. Both of you are pleased. Open questions remain, and the world is happy to leave them open. Will tool traditions in corvids ratchet from hooks to composite tools without hands? Will orcas invent new prey capture tactics that spread pod to pod like a fashion wave? Will parrots' drumming codes elaborate into regional styles you could map by rhythm? None of this needs prophecy. Intelligence here is a meadow path, not a ladder. It branches, it loops it, braids back into itself with rain. You've already seen how culture lives without cities. Beaver dams, fire regimes, ridgelines, taught to hooves. And now you watch it live in minds, moving from grandmother to calf, from bill to chick, from pod to pod, across a bright seam at the edge of a reef. You lie down with your hands pillowed under your cheek and let the planet's other thoughts wander over you like shade. You count in longer numbers now, 10,000, 100,000, nearly a million, and your stride falls into step with eras instead of afternoons. Grass still carries the wind's handwriting, but the letters lengthen. First, the easy prophecy, the ice returns. Not tomorrow, not next week, tens of thousands of years from your last warm picnic. The orbital metronomes you've been feeling all along, lean cool and snow that once melted in late spring, decides to keep showing up to work. Summer after summer, the white stays a little longer until it stacks into something that remembers how to flow. The sea sighs down the stairs by meters, and then tens of meters, exposing wide shelves and old river valleys to goosefoot and salt-tolerant grasses. Beringia takes your hand again. Doggerland downs its foggy pint and reopens for hoof traffic. You miss beaches briefly, and then realize there is now a beach 6 kilometers farther out if you're patient. Creatures answer by becoming new creatures. Elephants at the northern edges begin growing heavier. Coats year by year, generation by generation, the way a sentence gathers adjectives when the author gets cold. Tusks curve a little wider to sweep snow. Ears shrink to save heat. And calves learn how to listen for grass under drifts. Brown bears split where ranges stretch open country runners. Hear fish specialists there, mountain-shouldered bruisers, wherever the ice leaves a ladder of moraines. Wolves diversify into lean long-distance caribou chasers on the steppe and shorter forest-quiet deer specialists under spruce. The roles stay familiar. The faces change with the weather's mood. A mainstream anchor you can hum while the centuries go by. Earth's ice age pacing is tuned by Milankovitch cycles about 100,000-year wiggles in orbital eccentricity, 41,000-year nods in axial tilt, and 21,000-year precessional swivels. You don't need the math. You can feel the chord resolve in glaciers that step down. Valley hesitate and then rethink. When the planet leans warm again, the ice retreats politely, seas refill their bowls, and the shelf is once more for fish and tides. You have at this point earned a new step counter badge, remained humble in front of deep time. It vibrates gently. You nod back. Because land bridges come and go, gene pools slosh, then still, then slosh again. Without us gating everything with fences and docks, migrations choose their own semesters. On islands that fuse to continents during low seas, dwarf proboscidians meet mainland kin and either vanish into larger families or keep their petite strategies in tucked-away peninsulas. When waters rise again, rails that forgot to fly, stay marooned, and reinvent themselves for the umpteenth time as ground runners with strong legs and opinions. In the south, jaguars stroll into cooler grasslands when climates allow, then pull back into gallery forests when drought nudges trees toward rivers. Smilodon's lineage may fade or flower. Cats are specialists in both drama and exit strategies. Oceans remix slowly and thoroughly. Orcas split their playbooks by coast and by prey, until you could almost map shorelines by hunting technique alone. Maybe a squid hunting lineage in the Southern Ocean fattens into something wider and darker. An echo of the old macroraptors, only smarter and more polite. Bowheads keep their long lives wearing centuries the way redwoods do not. As trophies just as context. In cold basins, the icefish go on with their odd habit of surviving without hemoglobin. Their blood ghost pale, their bodies laced with antifreeze proteins. A quirky fact you never quite get used to, no matter how many winters you sit through. On land, convergence keeps playing its favorite prank, becoming a crab. Carcinization. The fancy word happens again and again in decapods because evolution is a comedian with one perfect joke and unlimited stage time. Elsewhere, the joke rhymes differently. Dog-like shapes in several unrelated carnivores. Sabers sprouting carefully opportunistically whenever heavy forelimbs and grapple tactics make them sensible. The return in warm forests of leaf-shaped ungulate ears because listening for a leopard at dusk is a technology that never depreciates. Joke won your Step Counter Awards did not try to name every new species after yourself, which is a mercy for taxonomists in several futures. Mine's two branch. On some rocky coast, otters settle into anvil traditions, so old the boulders themselves are worn with family history. Scallop grooves polished the way a staircase polishes under millions of feet. Up a river, raccoon-descended cousins, with longer fingers and calmer tempers, pass down twist and slide lid moves, turning certain floodplain logs into permanent lunch schools. In open woodlands, corvids embroider their hook-making with composite kits, thorn plus bark, wedge plus lever, a small ratcheting of better that stays after the teacher flies away. Palm cockatoos refine regional beats, 4 strokes here, 6, there, distinct tempo rhythms separated by a day's sail, if anyone were to sail. Historians still argue whether intelligence inevitably ratchets toward language and civilization, or whether that's human hubris insisting the latter goes only up. The rainforest replies by drumming. The reef replies by singing. The elephants reply by remembering. Continents shuffle just not for you. 1,000,000 years isn't enough to move a coastline off your map, but it is long enough to widen the Red Sea, to pull the Gulf of California farther apart, to carry California north a few dozen kilometers along its polite conveyor belt of fault lines. Mountains erode at a pace you can hear only by counting pebble sizes in a riverbed every few lifetimes. Volcanoes come and go as always. Some new cones rise on old scars. Others collapse inward and make lakes that will be honored by grebes and dragonflies long after your pillow cools. Species blink out even in this gentler world because background extinction is not an insult. It's the fee evolution pays to keep trying new sentences. A drought humiliates a specialist. A storm gifts a generalist new ground. A parasite finds the one crowded valley and reminds everyone about spacing. But the rates stay on the old dial, no fossil fuel jerk of the needle, no panicked bottlenecks that turn continents into curated exhibits. Refugia do their ancient job north-facing slopes, deep springs, sky islands, stitched by bird wings and bat commutes. Your maps, if you drew them once a millennium, would look like slow animation shapes, fattening, pinching, breathing. On islands, the experiments mature. New Zealand quietly writes a fresh chapter of huge parrots and sly rails. Madagascar keeps its lemur diversities tuned to rain and leaf. The Caribbean's ground sloths may try one more size class before stepping aside for something you can't guess yet. Maybe a large fruit specialist rodent with the social life of a monastery and the grooming habits of a salon. Hawaii continues its necklace of honey creeper beaks, some so precise that a single flower looks like a glove they alone can wear. Joke 2, your step counter. Now clearly sentient pings achieved did not start a startup to monetize parrot drum lessons. You salute again. Fire remains editor-in-chief, but it edits in paragraphs, not in all caps. Lightning writes cool, tidy burns through grassy countries that stay grassy. Thick-barked elders keep their appointment with ember and ash. Sprouters sprout, cedars seed. In the boreal belt crown, fires roll and then sleep for a century, while tamarack and poplar sign their fast signatures. The mosaic hardens into beauty, then softens, then hardens again, the way quilts are folded and unfolded in a patient house. Debates survive the species that would have hosted them. Historians still argue whether progress is a useful word without metallurgy and cities, or whether it always was a story we told ourselves to justify late nights and sore wrists. Paleontologists still argue whether intelligence is convergent, bound to pop up in elephants, corvids, parrots, cetaceans, or contingent, a rare weather pattern of neurons and luck. Ecologists still argue whether top-down control teeth or bottom-up control roots. Rain writes more of the script. The world shrugs and says both. You, for your part, have learned to listen without opinion, and to keep your footprints under the threshold the wind can erase by noon. As the million-year mark hovers like a horizon, you can almost touch. You feel the planet exactly as you did. On the first night, only slower weather teeth and time conducting a symphony that doesn't need a conductor. Beaver cities flood and fail, and seed meadows that later floods will adopt. Termite cathedrals rise, collapse compost into grass that feeds antelope, that feed lions, that feed beetles, that feed soil, which feeds trees that feed cockatoos, who drum until a chick listens and learns, and then improves the rhythm by one beat. Joke 3, the step counter sentimental now awards, kept your promise not to revisit crocodile dung sunscreen. You pat your hat. You have heroically evolved. You lie down where thin grass meets old rock and let the long night arrive from every direction. The stars look the same and are not. The constellations drift by degrees you cannot see and distances you can feel. Somewhere under ice, a seal sleeps, while a bowhead sings a song nobody has sung before. Somewhere in a warm forest, an elephant visits an ancestor's tusk, touches it, and walks on. The planet keeps improvising, and you keep listening, which is in a world that never needed you the most respectful thing you can do. Pre-dawn holds the world like a breath in the throat, and you wake to the clean hush before birds remember lyrics. Your blanket is a jacket, your pillow a rolled shirt that smells faintly of smoke from lightning a week ago. And the sky is a slate the sun hasn't chalked on yet. Cold nips your knuckles. Somewhere near a nightjar buzzes out a last syllable, then quits respectfully to let the chorus clock in. Thrush first, then a ripple of finches, then the comic honk of a goose that thinks every morning is its idea. You stand steam a little and take inventory of the simple things that still work. Ankles hat optimism. You start downhill by the faintly silver ribbon that proves the stream kept its appointment. Dew combs your shins. Spider silk recruits your face into a temporary scarf. An otter periscope blinks twice and sinks like a punctuation mark that's decided to be coy. You sip from a pocket of slow water filtered by gravel and the good manners of beaver engineering upstream, and the sun puts a pink fingernail on the ridge. Mainstream anchor to slide into the pocket of this hour a day is a day because Earth spins once roughly 24 hours, and thanks to the moon's tug, that spin has been slowing by tiny snips of time for eons, milliseconds per century. The world turns whether anyone names the turn. On a meadow lip, elk write their breath into the cold and move off with the mildness of big animals, not in a hurry. A fox crosses the track with a mouse in parenthetical grip and gives you the quick audit only foxes and border guards can manage. Your step counter, a drama student who never graduates, pings achieved, did not press snooze on sunrise. You accept. The light pours onto grass like warm milk, and every seed head becomes a chandelier. By mid-morning, you crest into oak savanna, and the day loosens. Acorn woodpeckers make their bead abacus trunks clack as they inventory a winter you will not attend. Ground squirrels pop and duck. A coyote puts its tongue out like a child concentrating and clears a log in one easy breath. In the distance, a burn scar from weeks ago wears the first green stubble, and 3 pronghorn demonstrate how a herd becomes a decision without ever electing a captain. You remember Section 8's quiet syllabus fire grass teeth, and you feel like a student who actually did the reading. The trail folds you into riparian shade beside a pond that did not exist until beavers built it, which is to say you have entered a room added onto the valley by the patient hammer of teeth. Turtles line a log like loaf tins. Quirky tidbit to file under, you cannot unknow this. Certain freshwater turtles can absorb oxygen through their cloaca. Yes, that's the one during long winter submersion, a handy trick that saves them from needing air when the pond locks up. You wish them the best, and keep your jokes to yourself for once. Noon tilts hot. The cicadas open the throttle. A kingfisher paints the air electric with one blue dash. A heron stands on one leg, inventing the concept of no rush. You tuck into shade and eat a fist of berries you studied carefully before trusting, because this world is generous but not motherly. Out on the glinting shallows, a moose wades like a barge and pulls up lily roots with the slow strength of a tugboat. Remember our first night sunscreen fiasco from the crocodile dung archives? You put your hat brim down with solemnity and vow again to let the past be educational, but not repetitive. Afternoon builds its own drama. Clouds swell into anvils, and the whole valley holds a town hall about it when arriving with opinions. Lightning sketches, quick proofs on the far ridge. Rain lifts the dust and returns it as perfume. The creek organ goes from adagio to blues riff in 2 minutes flat. Historians still argue whether the first human timekeepers were shadow sticks set in Mesopotamian courtyards, Egyptian water clocks dripping night into bowls, or lunar tally bones carved by ancestors with more patience than furniture. Your old world's debate wearing its favorite tie. Here the only clock is weather, and the minute hand is thunder walking away. After the storm, the world is polished. Every leaf has a highlight. Salamanders materialize from damp scripts under logs. Swallows restring the sky with stitches so fine they could hold a hem. A bear prints the mud with a textbook pause and decides your existence is uninteresting. Joke 1 your step counter awards achieved did not ask the bear for a selfie, which frankly shows growth. You climb the ridge toward evening legs, warm head, cool pockets, heavier with nothing. Up top, the wind holds you upright without asking what you weighed yesterday. The river looks like a ribbon someone recreased after ironing it flat. The floodplain shines in quilted patches of wet and new. Over the next shoulder, a short grass plain loosens into distance, and bison plow it with their shoulders' calves, kicking up little puffs like punctuation. A golden eagle steps off an updraft and pinwheels in silence. Somewhere below, a marmot revises its life goals to include stealth. Twilight starts early in the trees and late on the grass, which means you cross that seam when it matters. Bats turn on like a dimmer. Nighthawks scissor the low light. Fireflies practice grammar over the damp corner of a meadow commas, and semicolons blinking in an argument where everyone agrees. In a pool under alder salmon that spent years tasting open ocean return with a conviction you can feel in the ankles of the stream. They hold between stone and will then move. You kneel and let your hand trail. If the planet were a choir, this hour would be the sustain you never want to resolve. Night arrives with velvet competence. The Milky Way spills. A shooting star writes a fast footnote to a long paper. An owl stamps the dark with a question that doesn't need your answer. Far north the sky unlocks, and the aurora hangs out new laundry green first, then a wash of purple so faint you could miss it if you blinked wrong. You have no phone and no one to tag, but you still whisper, "Look," which is a good habit to keep, even when nobody is listening. Joke 2. You offer the Aurora your playlist, and it declines, preferring the quiet. Fair. Cold returns with authority, and in the margin between jacket and skin, you feel the whole day dew dust rain, that lick of heat on the back of your neck. When the sun pushed its thumb on noon, a wolf far off throws a line across the valley that hooks into your ribs and reminds you this is a house with many rooms and no doors. You are always both outside and welcome. Remember the glacier badge. You have new ones now. Did not revisit crocodile dung sunscreen. Refused to lease a studio in a prairie dog complex. Declined to crash the dolphin group chat. Joke 3. The step counter's sentimental buzzes graduated from drama school with honors. You bow to the dark. You lie down where you stood this morning, as if the day curled back into itself and left you exactly where you needed to be. The stream speaks in low cursive. The wind turns your hair into a soft mess. Somewhere, an elephant in another country taps a dry riverbed, and water remembers how to rise. If this world ever needed you, it was for this witness, not management. Attention, not applause. You close your eyes and the night turns the page. Let the day loosen its laces. Let the last edges soften. The air is cooler now, and it moves the way sleep moves. Unhurried circular gathering. Little sounds enfolding them into quiet. Your breath follows that curve longer on the exhale, slower on the return, a tide that doesn't ask for anything but presence. The ground beneath you is firm enough to carry every thought you didn't finish, and kind enough to keep those thoughts from bothering you while you rest. Overhead, the sky has become a wide, dim room. Stars hold their places like lanterns, set along a path you no longer need to walk. Far away, water continues its patient work, trickles into streams, streams into rivers, rivers into a dark sea that hums at its favorite volume. Near the leaves make the smallest, friendliest sounds, as if they're telling one another to sleep too, as if they know how. You can let go of the itinerary now. There isn't one. The beaver dams and termite towers keep their night watch without your help, and the herds arrange themselves by simple ancient agreements that don't require a meeting or minutes. The wind smooths your shoulders. A distant owl writes one last question mark, and then chooses the answer called silence. Good. If any worries still linger at the edges, let them perch for a moment, and then lift the way moths lift when you open a door to evening. They can find their own places. You can keep only the easy things. The feel of dew on your hands at dawn, the smell of rain just before it arrives, the soft green glow of river secrets, the quiet satisfaction of walking far enough to hear yourself think and long enough to hear yourself stop thinking. Stay right here, breathe. The planet will turn without hurrying you. Sleep can come in on quiet feet and settle beside you, and you can let it.